Good morning. Good morning. Would members of the Infrastructure and Environment Committee please report to Committee Room 1? Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Meeting 8 of the Infrastructure Environment Committee. Welcome to members of the committee and, of course, visiting councillors, and, of course, members of the public and staff. For those in the room with us, the screen at the back of the room provides real-time updates concerning where we are on the agenda and what's coming up next. You can follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at toronto.ca/council. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga, the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 of the Mississauga of the Credit. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? There are none. Can I have a motion to confirm the minutes of the September 9, 2019 meeting? Councillor Layton? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, let's work through the agenda. Item number 1, contract award for tender call, rehabilitation of the Sunrise Storm Trunk Sewer and Bermondsey and Dorset Park Sanitary Trunk Sewers. Someone want to move it? Councillor Layton's moving it. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item number 2, amendment to contracts for provision of professional services for Biosolids haulage and beneficial use. What's not to love about this? Councillor Layton, do you want to move that again? Moved by Councillor Layton. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 8.3, non-competitive contract with Aclara Technologies for the supply of proprietary meter reading hardware, system upgrade, and annual maintenance and support. Councillor Cole? Moved by Councillor Cole. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item number 4, Enwave Deepwater Cooling Proposed Heat Exchanger Amendment to Energy Transfer Agreement. What would you like to do with that? Moved by Councillor Layton. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item number 5 is held for deputations, and I will hold it also, even when the deputations are done. I'll hold it on behalf of Councillor McKelvey. 8.6, we're going to hold for deputations, winter maintenance program review. 8.7, automated vehicles tactical plan and readiness 2022. We're going to hold that for deputations. 8.8, update on council requested road safety initiatives and recommended speed limit reductions. Held by Councillor Cole. 8.9, technical amendments to bicycle lane regulations.
I'll move the staff recommendations.
Staff recommendations moved by Councillor Layton. All those in favor? Opposed?
The title was much juicier than what the actual recommendations are.
That's juicy?
It screams, read me, and no. No. Look at the report. Did any of you? It's a bunch of parking changes. Did you?
It's
course
more
you would.
exciting. It's more exciting than it looks. 8.10 pedestrian crossing Moore Avenue at Beltline Trail.
I'll move the staff recommendations and just thank staff for moving so quickly on this.
Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 8.11, yongeTOmorrow Municipal Class Environmental Assessment on Yonge Street from Queen Street to College. Carlton, interim update. It's being held for speakers. That's it. Oh, we do have one additional item.
Yes, Mr. Chair, the correspondence item that I sent, the data set was the main thing here, and it may exist for at least the 5 years that are listed here. It just hasn't been put together. So I'll withdraw this for now and
Okay.
not ask that you move a motion on my behalf, and if necessary, we can deal with it at another time.
All right, so we're not adding this new item. So it's not a new item. Winter
Ms.
maintenance?
McKelvey is holding that one. Let's go with item 6.
Start with winter.
Status, winter maintenance, correct.
Okay, first item up is item IE 8.6, Winter Maintenance Program Review. We have deputations. Robert Stambula, of the Harvard Village Residents Association. Mr. Stambula? It's 8.6, winter maintenance. No. John Plumadori? Great, thank you very much for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm here this morning representing Deer Park Residents Group, which is in Midtown Toronto, and I'm speaking to the sidewalk snow and ice issue only in this report. 20 years ago, since amalgamation, and yet Toronto and East York are still waiting for the clearing of our sidewalks of snow and ice. We have been treated sort of like second-class citizens in that our streets are not plowed. It's my understanding that $7 to $8 million is spent on lawsuits due to injuries on our streets, and I would suspect a lot of that is in regards to sidewalks. That would buy a lot of new equipment if we didn't have to pay those lawsuits. It's time to act. We're in a budget cycle, and it's time to find the dollars in order to undertake the clearing of snow and ice on our streets. The test that's being suggested by the department is unwarranted. We surely know our streets and our equipment, and this study is just, we see it as a delaying tactic. Let's get the job done. Safety hazards for citizens falling and breaking bones, both young and old, are happening on our streets. Impassable sidewalks, bogging down commuters on their way to work, seniors buying groceries, parents pushing strollers, and children walking to school. We deserve the same protection as other taxpayers in this city. IPA's public survey indicates in part that the remaining recommendations of the report would take place between 2022 and 2029. We ask this committee to reject the report from the department in regards to this clearing of snow and ice in Toronto and East York councils. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the deputant? Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. I notice in the way this is laid out, it says Toronto and East York. And my understanding is the legacy cities did things differently. So the old legacy city of East York actually cleared snow, and City of Toronto only cleared snow in front of seniors' homes. Would you agree with that? Did you know
Yes.
that?
Yes, I did.
So you think that now that we have, and I've had staff tell me, well, we're only clearing by ward, so that the old Ward 29 got cleared and my ward didn't get cleared. Would you think it fair that now that we have one big ward, that if we're clearing by wards, everybody's ward gets
Yes,
cleared?
definitely, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Any other questions for the deputant?
I don't think some were listening over here, but anyway.
No? Okay, thank you very much. Now, I understand Robert Stambula has arrived? Great, okay. Thank you very much. You've got your scarf there all ready for winter and winter maintenance.
Game on the weekend. It's the playoffs.
Okay, great. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning. I have a lot to say. My name is Robert Stambula. I'm here for the Harbour Village Residents Association. This is our neighborhood borders College, Bloor, Bathurst, and Spadina. We're right in the middle of the exclusion zone, and we have among the most used but least cared for sidewalks. At our annual general meeting last night, our membership resolved unanimously and said, whereas the board urged the mayor and councillor in January 2018, and we deputed the budget committee in February 19, so this is not a new issue to us. They resolved that the City of Toronto eliminates the service exclusion zone and harmonizes residential sidewalk snow clearing services across Toronto. Now, on the report that is being submitted today, I'm here for the neighborhoods without sidewalk snow clearing. We're extremely disappointed in the report. It fails to answer the question asked by the mayor and council. We expected a roadmap to remedy the service inequity, and rather we have a report to delay with no promise of an outcome. Astonishingly, this report actually would widen the gap. It accepts recommendations from the consultants to improve services on the low-volume sidewalks and harmonize them with the high-volume sidewalks. But that's where you have services, not where you don't have services. And at the same time, it rejects the recommendation from the consultants to have a 250-kilometer pilot. I can't imagine a good consultant actually recommending something that a client is not possible to actually achieve. I'm a retired provincial civil servant. It doesn't happen. I'm surprised that this thing could happen now. And their substitute is to look at the areas that they already know well, the areas where they have the seniors and persons with disabilities program, which alleviates their need to clear the little bit of snow in front of their sidewalk, but doesn't actually enable them to get anywhere. The report claims that Toronto meets or exceeds the winter maintenance of the peer cities in the GTHA. This claim is not well documented with regards to sidewalks. What is clear in the HDR report on page 27 regarding resident responsibility is that sidewalks are fully a city responsibility for Ottawa and Montreal, and a resident responsibility in U.S. cities. But with respect, Ottawa and Montreal are far better comparators than the smaller municipalities surrounding Toronto in the GTHA, and the information on them actually is sparse in the report. Quick note on the survey. The survey doesn't tackle the sidewalk snow clearing issue in any specificity, and it does not assist at all. Where's the section on benefits? Where's the section on the lens of equity, accountability, and safety that was the charge of the mayor and council? Where are the savings identified in avoiding liability claims? Because municipalities are on the hook. You cannot offload your common law liability for caring for the sidewalk off to homeowners and residents. Court cases have validated that time and time again. Where are the benefits in supporting Vision Zero? The report is silent. Your own public health report in 2016 cites a bunch of these, a bunch of benefits, from allowing people the opportunity to move, to avoiding injuries that they assess amounted up to $4 million a year from slips and falls and $6.7 million per year on liability claims. That is HL 15.4 from October 14th, 2016, your Public Health Committee. If we mitigate and avoid those costs and that suffering, where's that benefit? The same report says challenges arrive when snows accumulate on sidewalks rather than clearing them away. This is most likely to occur in areas of the City of Toronto and East York, where there is no, this is the exclusion zone. Public Health also says it's very important from the same report to actively monitor evolving technology to identify new options to be available to facilitate sidewalk clearing and removal in all areas of the city, as well as monitoring practice for sidewalk clearing in other cities with older cores and narrow sidewalks. This is 3 years ago. What has been accumulated since that report 3 years ago by Transportation Services, the report is silent. But what do? I would ask, my neighborhood asks that you fix this now from that motion. I would ask that no good consultant would recommend something that's not achievable, that this committee urge Transportation Services to undertake the pilot, the 250-kilometer pilot that they have recommended for the purposes of developing a roadmap to fully harmonize residential services, not if or how, or fully find that roadmap to fully implement residential sidewalk.
You could, you're well over 5 minutes, if you could wrap up.
And last sentence, HVRA remains ready and willing to help in the pilot, in its assessment, in the metrics, in all respects, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I made it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fletcher, you have a question for the deputant?
Yes, good morning. Thank you so much for your deputation. Could you just run over that Board of Health report that it was so fast?
I'm sorry.
I'd like to just go into that.
This was Toronto's Board of Health. It was actually called Action on Preventing Injuries from Wintertime Slips and Falls in Toronto, dated October 14th, 2016, and it was stamped HL 15.4.
Yes. Keep going. Tell me about it.
This was something we cited in our deputation to the Budget Committee last year, and I thought it was quite helpful in looking at some of the human costs associated with not clearing a sidewalk. It talks about the elderly and disabled being locked in their home, not being able to participate in community life and life outside their little piece of the street, that slips and falls are amounting to large numbers, and particularly those same people are vulnerable for those slips and falls. Last season, which was a tough season for everyone, our unaffiliated Facebook page had a broken-hearted mother with a picture of her son in a wheelchair outside of their home, unable to move anywhere through the many days and probably weeks of the ice and snow that happened. They talk about the.
Did they have a number there? The cost?
Well, they didn't split it at the time because they were taking an overall. But the numbers that they had was that there were 30,000 emergency visits between 2006 and 2015, and that there were 2,800 hospitalizations from Toronto residents from falls on snow and ice, particularly older adults who are vulnerable. I'm quoting this from the report on page 1, the opening page. These injuries cost the provincial healthcare system close to $4 million per year. Slips and falls and ice also cost the city $6.7 million per year as a result of liability claims. I think it's important to remember that the court decision that I cited was 2006 involving the city of Vaughan, which has a similar resident clearing bylaw. And the city tried to share the liability or push the liability on the residents for not clearing their sidewalk. And the Ontario Court of Appeal, so this is as high as it goes, short of the Supreme Court, said that the city can have a bylaw, it can fine someone for not following the bylaw, but it doesn't allow them to offload their common law responsibility for clearing the sidewalk. Hence, Toronto is on the hook whether people clear it or not. And there are savings to be done, there's savings to be had there. It's exactly what the public health totaled, I don't know, but logic would tell you that there is a good portion of that.
Is that is that 6.7 million for 2000?
No, this was, they were covering 26 to 2015, and it said 6.7 million per year.
Per year. So that's over that, let's say 10 years, that would be $67 million, right?
That would be, I think,
Yep, I got it.
all of it.
And we have divided this up by community council area, but for your purposes, would you consider splitting that? Because it is, East York does get snow clearing, and the city of Toronto, the old city, the legacy city of East York has snow clearing. The legacy city of Toronto does not. So are you aware of that difference?
Well,
Talk about Toronto and East York.
I have the little, there was a map produced that someone in the city was helpful in terms of showing where the exclusion zone is. And Harvard Village in our neighborhood, in the old city, is right in the middle of that.
Yes, I understand. I can show you a map that shows all the snow clearing north of the Danforth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Any other questions for the deputy? Councillor Layton?
Can you just help us understand what currently happens? Because the committee is made up of predominantly councillors from outside of the downtown core. So on a residential street like yours, what would typically happen after a snowfall?
I'm happy to, large or small, the bylaw says residents need to clear their walkways. I haven't studied the percentages, but along lengths of our residential roads go unattended to. I personally take care of a long strip of Lippincott between College and Van Cunit because I'm out there and I'm available, and I almost do that whole block. We have many rentals in our user. We have many student houses, and they're either unaware, uninterested, or unable. But the fact is, people that need to move, if you're able-bodied, I can get by. In our deputation to the Budget Committee, there was a lovely picture of King Edward's School with the kids, as kids would do, taking the path of least resistance was right down the middle of the street on a snowstorm day. We are one mistake away from a tragedy in our neighborhood of a student or an elderly person trying to maneuver through. What happens as well is the neighborhood has given up. God bless the municipal licensing and folks and the bylaw officers, because there's just too few of them to do too much work that's asked of them. And people stop calling to complain about it because nothing is done in a timely way to make it have an effect. And I think if you ask them, you would see that the number of complaints are very low in the city. The number of prosecutions are almost probably next to nothing. And it's because people have decided that doesn't work. But literally, if you're not an able-bodied person, you can't get to the streetcar stop, you can't get to a doctor's visit, you can't participate in civil society.
So for streets that have, seniors can opt into a program.
Yes.
To have their sidewalk cleared. And in some areas, that could mean that someone's coming for 3 or 4
Yes.
within a block.
Yes.
What does that look like?
Well, it's interesting because the report talks about all that seniors program and persons with disability being manual clearing. My experience with elders, these are elders in the neighborhood, is that actually it's mechanically cleared. A little Jeep, because they're able to get through. Why they can't get, because those sections of the neighborhood are no different than any other sections of the neighborhood. And to the credit of those civil servants, of those folks, when the seniors tell me when they come and do their little section, they're already up on the sidewalk. They don't kind of do the 20 feet and then get back on the road. They actually take a run to the corner and clear a longer segment and then get on the road to the next location. So it's effective in really only relieving those seniors and persons with disability from the bylaw responsibility to clear their 20 feet, 18, 20 feet. We're in a very tight downtown Victorian neighborhood. But beyond that, it isn't a way to get them to participate in all the things that they need to participate, want to participate, or obligations to meet, or healthcare issues to meet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Any other questions for the deputant? No? Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much.
Kevin Rupasingle. Thanks, Kevin, for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Morning, councillors. So I'm here on behalf of Cycle Toronto. We're a nonprofit cycling advocacy organization representing over 3,000 people that in the city of Toronto that choose to cycle. And this report, we wanted to just discuss some of the major issues that we have with snow clearing in the city of Toronto as it pertains to cycling specifically. Two major challenges that we have, and I've got some images that I'll share in a second, are one is we have a network of protected bike lanes that primarily is fairly well plowed, except at intersections. And this is something that makes it very difficult for somebody who feels like they'd like to commute to work. If 90% of their commute is clear, but at intersections they don't have an opportunity to get through safely, they will choose not to cycle. And Torontonians or Canadians, they don't mind being out in the cold in the winter to get to where they need to get to, but it has to be safe. And so that means that we have to make sure that our protected cycle tracks that are part of the winter priority snow clearing network are actually clear. The other area that we have problems is adjacent to painted bike lanes. And painted bike lanes prove to be a problem because snow ends up getting collected in the bike lane itself. Especially if there's parking adjacent to it, then there are often snow is being pulled in and out of the bike lane, which makes it very unsafe for people to go through. And I'm just going to connect the screen here. Yeah, I just want to throw this one. I'll do so in this image here, you can see, so this is Bloor Street, which is a very popular cycling route. You can see right at the bottom here that the pavement is actually clear, but as you get to the intersection, you just get all of the snow piled up. And it's, well, yeah, there it is. And so this makes it very difficult for people to actually bike through. You can see on this image as well, how is anybody going to actually clear something like this in order to continue to this very well-paved section of Bloor? And this forces people on bikes to go and mix with traffic where it is actually fairly well plowed. And this discourages people from biking year-round. They're perfectly able to. We're spending a lot of money and trying to make sure that we have a winter priority network, but there's these little areas that are making it ineffective. This is another example at Bathurst and Adelaide, where we don't have physical protection, and a lot of the snow has ended up in this lay-by that allows cyclists to make a left turn. We've seen dozens of cyclists every light cycle waiting here to make a proper turn, but if this is how the infrastructure is used to store snow, then people aren't going to feel comfortable making a left turn from something like Bathurst onto Adelaide. And this is again on Bloor Street, a different part where it's not protected. This is completely impassable. Nobody is going to feel comfortable taking their bike in what should be a protected bike lane when snow is being shoveled in and completely covering it up. You can see that again here. There's a bike lane under there, if you'd believe it. And this is another example of a painted and unprotected facility. This is a contraflow lane where even though one direction has been plowed sufficiently to make sure that it's safe for cars to get through, people on bikes who are going the opposite direction aren't able to actually stay in their lane because it's filled with snow. And so, again, we have a winter priority network. Some of the recommendations of this review are to make sure that we're reviewing cycling infrastructure, and these are some of the key problems that we have seen. We'd like to see a proper review, particularly on cycling, where there are cycle tracks at intersections and when there's painted bike lanes, especially when there's parking next door. So, thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Councillor Fletcher?
Thank you very much. Thank you for your photos. They are worth 1,000 words. I'll add some more words. Those look like windrows to me. You're familiar with windrows, which we clear in Scarborough, I believe, maybe other old legacy cities, where once you've plowed and you've closed off somebody's drive or somebody's access, you have to come and clear it. That does look like the same thing to me, where they've simply plowed and then blocked the bike lane. So if we're clearing windrows, we should really clear all windrows, including ones that are transportation issues like the pictures that you have shown us here today. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think I would generally agree that that's a big part of the problem. And one of the challenges that we've identified with cycling infrastructure is that it's plowed the same way as the street next to it. And with a street, you can go through once, and once it's cleared, it's pretty clear for people to be able to drive through and so on. But with cycling, often because snow gets pulled in again by plows going the other direction or by cars pulling in and out of the bike lane, there needs to be some sort of standard that suggests that we need to go back after some point in time to make sure that it is still clear, or to remove any of the extra snow that has been pulled into the bike lane. And so that could be either through windrow clearing or a specific cycling-focused process. I think.
And perhaps it requires a smaller piece of equipment in order to get the picture that you have there, to get close to the curb and get that out. There's bigger plows that go up and down streets, but as I understand it, in order to get close to the curb, sometimes you need more specialized equipment. So one path on streets that have bike lanes, are you suggesting one path for the main road and then come back and make sure that lane is cleared?
I think we're happy to discuss as part of the review what the best process might be. I think in some cases, we don't need to have specialized equipment. Something like this, it should be able to share the equipment you already have. But we also do have specialized equipment
You have to go back again.
Right. And so if we are going back again, even specialized equipment could be useful because we already do have specialized equipment that goes through our protected bike lanes. And so just having a better ability to deploy those at the spots that we need to, I think is really going to get us the bang for our buck when we have a winter snow clear network for cycling infrastructure.
So really, it is, if there's specialized equipment for the dedicated lanes, if it's not a dedicated lane protected, then there needs to be a different regimen. Come back again and clear. Last winter, I had a tremendous number of calls because the actual bike lanes, painted lanes, simply weren't cleared, I gather, in the way it's being done at the moment. So a protocol for streets with bike lanes. There's also something where there's different categories of clearing. Do you agree with that? Or you think that where there's a lane, it should be cleared?
I think certainly when there is a lane, it should be cleared. There's definitely an opportunity to improve the level of service, specifically when we're looking at cycling infrastructure. As for protocols, yes, I agree that we should be having a protocol developed to make sure that we're doing second passes, but we also have protocols within the city already that allow for the temporary removal of parking adjacent to a bike lane or to another area where we need to make sure that snow is removed.
Right.
And I think we have that ability already, and we just don't exercise it very regularly, even though other cities do.
You track complaints in any way through Cycle Toronto in the winter? Have you got anything you can show and say, here's all the calls about, well, Dundas, for instance, which couldn't pass, and other ones? Do your members call in? Is there some way you're able to track that where we can have some empirical data in order to create such a protocol?
Right. I don't know that we have a comprehensive.
Or 311, I'll ask about 311 here.
I'm sure 311, we typically will suggest folks that they get in touch with 311, and I think there are certainly instances that we have documented, but we don't have a comprehensive database.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Any other questions for the deputant? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions for staff?
Oh, sorry.
Councillor Cole, Councillor Fletcher, and I think Councillor Layton. We don't differentiate between visiting and committee members.
If I could,
It's
I'd
not a
have
rule
an
of order. It's at the discretion of the chair.
Oh, okay.
So we treat everybody equally. I'm sorry, did I say Councillor Cole, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Layton?
Okay, just a question of staff. This is similar to the constant complaints that I received in my office about the boulevards, the maintenance of our boulevards, the weeds, the overgrown grass, the garbage in the boulevards in front of homes and also commercial retailers. Do we have any kind of methodology in reminding residents and reminding retailers about their responsibility in clearing their sidewalk in front of their premise or cutting the jungle in front of their home or the residence? Do we have any ongoing program to remind them that they have certain responsibilities?
Through the chair, good morning, Councillor Cole. I think one of the things that we've found from doing this assessment is that our current protocols for communicating out to the community their responsibilities, but also the extent of our program and what they can expect in terms of either winter services or summer maintenance is not nearly where it needs to be. And so one of the things we're going to be rolling out, and you'll be seeing within the next month before the winter season is upon us, is a much more comprehensive communications strategy and a rollout to do both of those things, to let people know the suite of services that they can currently expect to receive, and also to remind them of their responsibilities, but also how to make the winter weather more palatable in their area.
So how do we hope to do this? How do we let people know that the city has certain services, what the scope of the services are, what the limitations are, and what their role in this as budding homeowners or store owners? How are we going to communicate that?
We are going to develop and are in the process of working with the communications team to develop a comprehensive program to set that out. Some of it's going to be social media, some of it will be print and radio and drive time radio. It's going to be a comprehensive communications approach to addressing winter weather.
Could
and we can certainly provide more information on that when we have the plan in place.
Could we put something in the notices like tax bills, whatever it is, as another reminder rather than the usual? Can we do something that might catch people's attention?
Through the chair, there is an opportunity to include within one's property tax envelope information regarding city services. So for instance, I'm familiar with Toronto Water and Solid Waste Management Services, including a brochure or a brief flyer within the envelope which informs the resident of various services and responsibilities. So in fact, there could be an opportunity that we can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Councillor Fletcher?
Do it. Oh, thank you. Could you outline, or if you don't have it here, perhaps by council, how many 311 calls you had last year about clearing of bike lanes? I'm not, you know, that's a lot to ask you right now. Do you have that, or did I miss it? Could you hold my timeline?
I could tell you what the summary that I have is for complaints and enforcement last year, which was just under 5,000 for the entire season. Not necessarily on bike lanes only, though.
I'm looking for the,
Okay, I'll have to get that information for you. I don't, I mean, we might have it in here. We'll skim through while.
perhaps 311 could identify for you. Thank you. Secondly, you would agree that legacy cities had different policies.
Through the chair, I
This is a
would.
little map of East York with their legacy city west of Coxwell, and you can see that those were cleared, and then this whole section here was not cleared. That was 2002 to 3.
Oh, great.
And then 2009, something very exciting happened, and that's now all cleared. And the basis of that clearing was to have a unified approach per ward. I'm not sure if everybody knew that. But now, I think we all know, we all have much bigger wards. So a unified approach to wards, my mind, means we now have the entire ward is going to be cleared. So that's the change that was undertaken by Transportation Services in order to harmonize what was Ward 29 in the past. Have you seen those before, or maybe this was before your time?
Through the chair, it certainly is before my time, but I have seen them before.
You have seen them, and there's a whole report there. Thank you. can you just let me know within the old city of Toronto, how many streets are cleared, how many seniors does Transportation Services visit in order to clear this street? Or more clearly, on how many streets, the number of streets on which there are seniors that Transportation Services visits?
Through the chair, so the seniors program clears about 7,000 residents, and they are predominantly in the city of Toronto.
So that's by residents, but do you have by street? Is that 7,000 streets? Because we could have.
No, that's 7,000 people who apply
Yes.
to
so
be
you
in the
could
seniors
break that-
program.
You could break that down by street. That's
Yes.
possible.
Yes.
So by council, we might know just how many streets, and how many streets are there in this old city of Toronto?
5,600 lane miles. Number of streets, I don't know, 5,600 kilometer miles.
So perhaps we can also know the number of streets, so we understand the number of streets where you already are on.
Are you talking about local streets?
Yep,
Local
local
roads?
Because
We can certainly get that.
You do clear certain streets. You
We clear all streets
arterial
minus the ones that are,
sidewalks.
yeah. So we clear all the high-volume sidewalks. Well, and as you know, the ones that we don't clear are the ones predominantly in the old city of Toronto where we have not cleared because of either encroachments or
Yeah, I
the
understand.
width.
But you do clear arterials,
We do,
minor arterials?
we do,
Do you clear collectors?
we do.
Do you clear in front of schools?
Unless it's on, I mean, we do, yes, unless there's some situations on side streets, I believe, where there's encroachments.
Do you clear in front of hospitals?
We do, because predominantly those are on arterials and
Are
minors.
there any other institutions that you clear that, I know 14 Division Police Station, it's on a local road. Would you clear that, or would they clear that?
We would clear based on the classification and the location.
Well, the road might not be, it's a local road, actually.
I don't know that
So
exact one. Do you know
institutionally,
that?
are there institutions that you clear because they're critical institutions and they need their sidewalk?
No, and typically, not always, as you pointed out some examples, but typically, the main entrances and exits to many of those locations are on streets that we do clear. In some cases, if they're not, then the adjacent people would be responsible for that.
And the cost of being sued, that was a $6.7 million number over 10 years, quite a while ago. Do you have the current number of cost to the city for being sued
For claims,
altogether?
all claims for snow,
sidewalks with-
like post-snow trip and falls, and then the
Side-
boulevard impacts. We'd have to verify that through risk, but we can get that for you.
You could get that. Well, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. I have Councillor Layton and then Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Thank you very much. To staff, there was a specific request for staff to evaluate the snow maintenance standards across the city through an equity, accessibility, and safety lens. It seems to me that we may have gotten safety a little bit out of there, but little around the accessibility and equity. Can you explain where we might find that within the report?
Through the chair, on page 6 at the bottom, the section is called Mechanical Sidewalk Clearing Accessibility for Ontarians and Disabilities, AODA, on the bottom of page 6.
So we didn't look at equity between the delivery of service, the difference in level of delivery of service from one point of the city to another, or the ability for seniors perhaps that don't meet this notion of disability, or parents with carriages. It's like it really is just this paragraph that was the extent to which we examined the inequity in delivery of service currently with our sidewalk clearing?
So as has been, through the chair, as has been mentioned, the legacy city issue is the reason why we have different levels of service across the city in terms of programs. I wouldn't say levels of service, actually. I would say different program areas that that occur. One of the reasons, my understanding, that the seniors program came into effect is because there was challenges with seniors being able to manage their frontages during snow and ice, and so we compensated for that by having the seniors program, which is predominantly, as I mentioned earlier, in Toronto, where there is not sidewalk clearing on local roads.
So, but it wasn't clearing the front of a senior's house is all well and good, but if the senior actually tries to walk down the street, that's wherein lies the problem. That's the inequity that we've missed here, is that it's not necessarily, I'm just wondering if that was examined as part of the dialogue around equity and accessibility, not just plowing in front of someone's house, but the ability for that person to get down the street.
As it relates to sidewalks, it was examined, and the level of service that exists for local roads in Toronto is different than it is for other areas of the city.
Different how?
Different in that there's no mechanical clearing in locations where we're not able to do it, and one of the reasons why we're doing this...
Sorry, you're unable to do mechanical clearing. You've made that determination?
Well, we have made the determination that in order to be able to look at a more robust and consistent program citywide, we need to understand where we can actually maneuver. And as it was mentioned by one of the deputants, looking at new equipment, we have purchased some new equipment, which we're going to be sharing with our colleagues in solid waste for the summer season so that we can do mechanical clearing. And I think there's a bit of a misconception that we're just going to be plowing right in front of seniors' homes. The goal is to look at the contiguous area on the block face in those locations so that we can test that equipment and come back with an additional set of recommendations potentially about how we could move that recommendation forward if that equipment works. One of the things we learned from looking at the city of Ottawa, who does, the only municipality that we found that does local road sidewalks, is that they were much more aggressive over time in managing encroachments into the public right-of-way, including retaining walls and other pieces that make it extremely difficult for sidewalk plows to operate in narrow rights-of-way. So one of the recommendations of this report to get to an equitable solution was to assess all of the sidewalks that aren't currently being mechanically plowed to understand how we could put a program together in future.
So do we currently use mechanical clearing for seniors, for the seniors program?
We do not.
At all?
No, we do not.
Are you certain of that? Because there's the feedback that we're getting is that it is used.
Oh, Dominic has indicated that on corners where they're able to get on and off, that they sometimes use the mechanical plows.
In fact, we do have the equipment. It can be done. We just might not have the level of equipment that is necessary to deliver the service across the downtown core.
My understanding is the equipment that we have, the sidewalk plows that we have are much larger than certainly the ones that we've purchased are smaller in size to be able to maneuver down all of the streets in the older Toronto neighborhoods.
But they do make smaller equipment, correct?
That's why we purchased some, yes.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Second round of questions, please.
Councillor Peruza, I'm looking forward to your first round. Yeah, okay, you're on the list. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Thanks. There was a number thrown out with regard to litigation. How much was that? 7 mil? Was it 7 million? Someone said. What's the number?
I think I talked about 7,000 seniors. Well, which, I'm sorry, the number in terms of litigation, we didn't actually have it. We're getting that right now. See if we have it.
Yeah, so, but that would be across the entire city, right?
Correct.
So the arrangement that this would change, if we made these changes in the South District, that wouldn't necessarily stop the existing litigation for the rest of the city. Is that fair to say?
We get claims.
You get across the entire city, right?
Claims across the entire.
Yeah, and
We get
also,
claims across the entire city, not only for trip and fall, which we absolutely do during the winter, but also for impacts to boulevard grass, et cetera, from plows.
and that's not going to stop because you're going to actually get more claims if you go down these small little streets in the South District. You're going to get more claims for the those same grass problems because you're going to be tearing up their turf. Is that fair to say?
We anticipate, and one of the reasons why it's so important to test this equipment is that we anticipate that we will have impacts to private property, to parked cars in some of these locations, and so we don't want to go down that path.
Claims could
So
go up then,
testing the
yes?
equipment is critical to ensure that we can actually deliver the
enough.
service.
Also, I'm assuming that because you get a lot of these slip and falls or claims with regard to, that are related to inclement weather during the winter, that happens in areas where there is snow clearing. Those claims are going to continue. So the idea that all these claims are going to go away is, you know, if you try and make that statement, that's not a very accurate statement.
We do get claims citywide, whether there's sidewalk plowing or not.
Right, thanks. Oh, I have one more question. Who did this report? Is it Hub, HBS?
It was HDR,
How much did it cost?
but approximately 200,000
Where'd that 200,000 come from? Operating budget or capital budget?
from the winter maintenance operating budget. Oh, it came from the capital budget.
There's a good question.
Yeah.
How did you justify, because we did this before at council, and I was fairly concerned about this, and we tracked back with the CFO who said that wasn't really kind of, let's say, kosher. How do you justify winter maintenance? Even the definition of it is maintenance. How do you pull that from your capital budget?
Well, so programmatically, one of the goals was to figure out what type of equipment was necessary to purchase in order to address some of the issues related to this, and so that's one of the reasons why I believe that we
So you
looked
used
at.
the idea because you were buying more equipment that justified you pulling from capital?
Well, we used the idea that we needed to do analysis in order to be able to do procurement.
Okay, well, that's maybe an offline conversation I need to have with the deputy city manager and the CFO.
Yes, it sounds like an offline discussion. I think I had Councillor Perusa. Oh, no, I had Councillor McKelvey, and then we go to a second round, starting off with Councillor Perusa. Well, I think we're just going to skip to the second round. Okay, well, anyway, let's go to Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask questions to be crystal clear about what the recommendation is today. So you have recommended that we receive this report for information. That's the recommendation.
Through the chair, that is correct.
And then on page 9 of your report, you're outlining next steps. And so in that, at this point, you're going to continue to look at sidewalks that are not cleared.
Correct.
And confirm how we could do that in the future.
Correct.
You're going to conduct a snow clearing trial program on about 250 kilometers of streets. Have you already identified where those might be?
So we're actually going to be testing equipment related in contiguous areas to the seniors program, and it will probably be about it will all told be about 150 to 200 kilometers of street that we are able to cover. And that will be related to the existing seniors program.
Okay, and then you're going to review sidewalk encroachment management, resident responsibilities, and bylaw control.
Correct.
And through that, is there anything where we are reviewing liability charges that come against us for slip and falls, that go at residents at slip and falls? Like, because this seems to be, it's become a bit of a pervasive problem where nobody's responsible. I can wear high heels and know that it's an ice storm, and I can go out and slip, and then I can try and like sue everybody. Like, are we looking at this in any sort of way?
So through the chair, we recently reorganized, as you know, and one of the organizational changes that we made was to create a claims and investigation section within our road operations unit, and that is on the work program for them to start to look more comprehensively at the source and how to minimize claims. So we will have more information on that. We don't have it right now, but we're working towards that.
Okay.
And then the other piece that's probably not in that list, as I mentioned to Councillor Cole, is a much more robust communications plan.
And then right now, do we receive reports that say when our trucks are going out, when our sidewalks are going out? Is that information publicly available? So I'm thinking in terms of like private contractors, it's good for them to know, what our level of status is. and maybe they're working to the same as well.
Through you, we actually do, and in fact, you will see for the first time this year a total overhaul of the Plow TO website, which has a lot more functionality and includes much more updated information on where the plows are and when people can expect to see them. So we're launching that again in the next week or so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKelvey. Councillor Perusa.
Could you just describe very briefly how this program works?
Through the speaker, do you mean our existing winter maintenance program?
Starts when it gets cold and this starts to fall.
The whole program?
Yeah.
So I can, and Dominic's going to help me.
Very succinctly.
Because he's, oh boy, okay. We have various service levels that start with anti-icing when we have ice conditions that we go and anti-ice on expressways, on arterial
I guess what I'm
roads.
asking is this.
Yeah, what are you asking?
So,
I'm sorry.
so
I'm
we have,
trying to be succinct.
we contract out all of this work by and large, right?
About
Small
90%
portion
of it. About 90% of it.
Precisely. So sometime in November, machines and contractors begin to show up in our work yards. They park their machines there, park their trucks, their plows, et cetera, and they basically now wait for events to take place, whether it's icing, snow removal, whatever, right?
That is correct.
And then it ends the program. So it starts sometime in November, ended in March. Now we've stretched it out to April because sometimes we get big snow events in April, right?
That is correct, and I believe the first
And
equipment
we pay
comes in the
about
middle of
$90
October.
million, it says here in your report, for the program, more or less. And then you have a
93.
93, and then you have like some $19 million or upwards about $20 million, kind of like in a reserve kitty, just in case things go haywire. And
Correct.
we get way more snow than we anticipated, or we get, okay.
Like the ice
So-
storm.
So how many snow events did we get last year?
40 to 60.
Was it 40 or was it 60?
Well, do you want to describe what that means?
So we will.
20 is a big difference, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the number of winter events for the previous winter season was, I think, about 45, and that's how we would determine by number of salting events, how many times we responded with just salt trucks. And then within that, there would be times when we have responded with our plow trucks, which would be generally about 4 to 6 winter events. And then our sidewalk machines alone, about 24 winter events.
Now, full kilter event, how many machines and I hate to call them men, but let's call them men. We call them people. I don't know what you want to call them, but people power. Okay.
Peoples.
How many
My pieces
people?
of it.
Yeah. How many people would be out there clearing, icing, removing, shoveling, answering phone calls, directing traffic?
Through the chair, all told, about 1,500 people.
So 1,500 people are given. And how many of those would be would represent the contractors?
The majority, probably between 12 to 1,300.
12 to 1,300. So now, when they're out shoveling and clearing your roads and sidewalks and so on, they're out there. When we don't have a snow event, what are they doing?
They are, depending on the type of equipment involved, they may be stationed at their depot awaiting to be mobilized for salting
Well,
operations.
some are at the works yard, some are on standby, but they're all kind of like waiting around for something to happen, right?
Yeah, they have to be on the road within 15 minutes of the thresholds
So
being met.
for the $90 million that we spend on this, right, like, so per person, you know the hours of work, for example, right, that they put into the 40 to 60 snow events that we had last year. What is it costing us per hour? Like, what's the per people cost per hour to deliver this program? Is it like $50 an hour? Is it $1,500 an hour?
It would range per person, so in the $50 to $75 per person range. So depending on the response to the event, we could be up into the tens of thousands of dollars per hour, all told.
Okay, so what is it? Is it 50 to 70, or is it $10,000 per hour? Like,
Well, it's 50 to 70.
you have a per hour cost for the program. I mean, if I were you, I'd have that number at my fingertips, right?
Not everybody has the same pay
I
because they have
understand
different
that.
levels
I
of,
understand
right?
that.
So that's why it's
Your
50 to
winter-
75.
I understand that. Your winter maintenance program, your $90 to $110 million potential program, based on the number of hours of work for the snow events, what does that cost us per hour?
We don't have a number for that.
We don't have a number for that. So how do you, so if you don't have that number, how do you determine whether or not you're getting good value?
I mean, we have a service level agreement that we need to meet. The service levels are articulated by type of street and by type of event, and when we benchmark against those service levels. Not a per hour charge.
Counselor,
Yeah, I'd like to be included in a second round.
well, why don't you just keep going, because I'm very excited about your second round of questions.
And I'll tell you where I'm going with this. I don't believe that it's as sunny as your report would indicate in terms of people's happiness with the program. This is something that I've sort of, been turning my mind to a little more, as you can imagine. Why isn't it as sunny? So I just want to ask you this. You went out and did a survey, and the survey suggests that people are, somewhat happy, very happy, 57%, 47, whatever they said, right? What percentage of road users are cyclists?
Overall? 3%.
3%. What percentage of our populations are seniors with disabilities?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Exactly. So when you look at that survey and then you look at those numbers, you would think that cyclists wouldn't be very happy with your snow removal, and seniors with disabilities wouldn't be very happy with your snow removal. So your survey, I don't know what percentages or what numbers of those folks it would capture.
We're looking to see if we have the breakdown by demographics. I think that the cyclists certainly, since we've upgraded and started to do more maintenance of cycle facilities, certainly we heard some concerns today about the clearing of bicycle facilities that need to be improved. But there is relatively an increase in level of service in the last number of years for cycling facilities. So I think that's one of the reasons why, for the people who were included in that survey, again, it was only 1,000 people. For the people who were included in that survey, we did see some positive response. I think the other piece, and I agree with you, I think it was mixed response, right? Like it was certainly over 50%, but there was certainly some good information that came out around people's concerns and frustration. And I think that we've certainly taken that to heart. We did find out that the people who knew more about what services we were providing were more likely to understand and understand what they should expect, and therefore be potentially more satisfied with the service. And we don't do a particularly good job at communicating what service they should expect.
Why aren't potholes part of your winter maintenance program?
We do potholes all year long. I mean, when the
I
streets are
understand
covered
that,
with snow.
But why aren't they very much? Because potholes, in large part, are a result of our winter weather events.
Our staff do potholes all winter long. Our crews do potholes.
I understand that. I understand you have some 25 crews or 25 individuals with some 20 or 25 asphalt, what do they call them?
Hot boxes.
Bins, hot boxes.
50 crews with hot boxes, typically, daily.
I'm sorry?
I believe it's 50 crews. On a blitz, when we do the blitzes. When we do the blitzes, it's 50. When we do the regular daily, it's about 25. You're right.
It's actually a little more complicated than that, so I wouldn't simply use those kind of like that. That's a rather simplistic. Well, okay, so you have, how many hot boxes you got?
20, approximately 20.
20 hot boxes, how are you going to have 50 crews?
Well, you need multiple people on each crew.
Okay, all right. So I don't. Okay, I'm not going to go on to, because we're dealing with
Councillor Peruzza,
dealing with
your time's almost up. And I don't.
Let me just ask the question.
I don't think we're going to a third round. So if you could.
This is my second round, right?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to a third round. If you could wrap up.
I'm getting there. Okay. So you're the winter maintenance program, as you've presented it here, does not include the fixing up or patching up of the roads. Much of that work we do during the winter cycle as well, correct?
It does not include that.
Yeah. Why wouldn't we include that as part of that, so that we have a clear picture? I guess the place that I'm trying to get to is this. We have some 1,500 people who come in, swoop down on the city during the winter months and for the winter maintenance program. We do such a poor job of fixing our roads and fixing our potholes, and they're all broken down. Why wouldn't we be a little more sophisticated and figure a way to make that part of of our road maintenance a part of this program, so that we fix our roads quicker, get to our potholes faster?
Councillor Bruiser, you're over 5 minutes on the second round. That's your last question.
Can you just let them answer that question?
Yeah.
Our
They can answer.
potholes and our interim repair work that is conducted through the city has always been and has always been done by our in-house crews. They're staffed and resourced to do that work. The only time we ever use contracted crews to do pothole repair is when we do a major maintenance effort like the Gardner, and that also includes our crews as well. So the contracted services specifically to the contract is just the part of the winter maintenance program, not the interim road repairs and pothole repairs that we do annually.
Thank you, Councillor Cruz. Any other questions for staff on a second round? Councillor Layton?
Yes, thank you very much. Who responds to calls of people with 311 calls of people who haven't cleared their sidewalk? Who goes out to do the inspection? Was it MLS or is it transportation?
It's our field investigators and our bylaw officers. It's transportation.
In transportation?
Correct, unless there's an issue on private property, and then we work with MLS. But if it's in the right-of-way, it's transportation.
It's transportation, okay. What's the response time?
Was it 72 hours?
No, in some cases it's 24 to 36.
I'm hearing 24 to 36 hours, sorry, 24 to 36 hours.
In your service
from the
standard,
complaints.
where I'm looking through the service standards here, and there's road/winter request complaint,
Where's that? Yeah.
sidewalk, salting sand, and snow clearing, because it's certainly not 24 hours, it's the 72 hours according to this.
I think. Are you referring to the service levels in the budget or in the report?
In the budget.
Yeah, I think in the budget it is 72 hours. I think we try to do the response within 24 to 36 hours, especially for bylaw infraction.
So this past season, how many calls did we get and how many inspections did we do?
The inspections were just under 5,000, so 4,698. For ice and snow-covered sidewalks. For notice of inspection, we put out just over 2,000. Charges laid were 11. And then requests to clear by road operations. So this was after the snow event was over, to come back and clear some of these issues, was about 61 of them, it looks like.
And so how many calls total? You had 5,000 inspections. How many calls? And do these include road and sidewalk, or are these just sidewalk?
So the number of service requests that we received for sidewalk snow clearing was 3,293 in the 18-19 season, which was almost 3 times as many as we received the year previous.
And how many inspections were done of those 3,293?
Just for sidewalks?
Just for sidewalks?
All of them would have been inspected.
And then the notice of,
Yeah, and then, as I mentioned, the only ones, there were only 11 where we laid charges.
okay. Just going back to an answer from one of my previous questions about who plows sidewalks, major cities that plow sidewalks. There are some listed in this consultant's report, Ottawa and Montreal. How do they do it?
So Ottawa is the only one that we indicated plows local road sidewalks. They do it mechanically, and part of the reason that they're able to do it mechanically is because they have enforced encroachment laws much more aggressively than we have here in the City of Toronto over time. And so they have appropriate setbacks. So many of the sidewalks and the boulevards and the setbacks from the sidewalk are wide enough that they're able to accomplish that.
So a couple of years ago, we changed the boundaries about who was getting mechanical clearing in East York. And I'm told that, and having spent some time in East York, I realized the roads and sidewalks are quite similar in the two areas that we changed. We kind of added, I don't know how many streets, but it was a lot of streets. How did we accommodate that?
Through the chair, staff did a review at the time. I think they were at the time predominantly in Councillor Fletcher's ward, and a number of streets were added, maybe 15 to 20 kilometers. So a further review was done using, based on the existing equipment that we had at the time. And in those locations, there would have been identified a lesser number of encroachments, or sometimes the concern is actually an obstacle that's in the middle of the sidewalk, which are more predominant the closer you get to the downtown core, where it's not the width of the sidewalk that is really the challenge. It's that there could be a fire hydrant or a hydro pole or a street sign or something physically blocking the movement of the sidewalk plow.
And so how do you manage that or encroachments in East York now?
We didn't add those streets.
Yeah.
Those streets that had the blockages were not added as part, so there was a review that was done in 15.
Looks like the map that all the streets north of the Danforth were added.
Again, staff through the chair, staff reviewed it at the time and determined that, I suppose, that there were not encroachments at those locations, that the adjacent property may just have been front lawn as opposed to retaining walls, fences, hedges, which are again more predominant in the downtown core.
See, I'll save that for my room.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Any other questions for staff? Speakers? Councillor Layton.
I have a motion that the General Manager, Transportation Services, be requested to report directly to the next meeting of City Council on A, the feasibility of implementing the enhanced mechanical sidewalk clearing pilot as recommended by HDR consultants in the winter maintenance program review, B, the number of kilometers of sidewalk proposed to be cleared as part of the staff proposed pilot project, and C, the possibility of enhanced snow clearing in bike lanes, 1, after the first 48 hours, 2, the use of brushes and more narrow plows, and 3, the removal of parked cars to clear parking spaces adjacent bike lanes. Last year was a particularly bad year. I don't fault staff for this, but it drew attention to a major problem in our city. If you don't drive and you rely on walking, taking public transit, or cycling around the city, after a snowstorm, if you have an issue with mobility, you're stuck in your home. I don't have a car. And so when I go shopping, I got 2 little girls. One of them was at home with my partner for the year on parental leave. And they were having trouble getting out of the house. And that's not because we didn't shovel, and not because the city didn't go and shovel the seniors' homes that live on our street. But yeah, some of our neighbors are bad neighbors, and they don't shovel. Some of our neighbors are landlords or tenants that may not take that initiative. Some of them own their own house, and they might not take that initiative. They're perfectly able to, but maybe they drive out the laneway at the back and they just forget to for a couple days. And then it gets so hard to chop through the snow and to actually, it takes a lot of effort, so they kind of say, well, I'm going to wait till the next warmer day. It happens a lot. And you know how we have to get around when we're going shopping? We walk 3 blocks to Fiesta Farm, but that's pretty close. But I had to lift up the stroller on 3 occasions just to get to the end of my street. I had to push my stroller onto the street for a chunk of the block just because it was so impassable. That's not fair. It's not right, but it's also not fair to do that to families. I think I was able to do it. My partner, if she had maybe if she wasn't at home full time with my daughter and had a little bit more sleep, she probably would have done it herself. But if you're a mom, a single mom, you don't have the resources, can't leave your child at home, you got to take the stroller out, it's impossible to get around the city. One of the properties I had to carry my stroller over was beside Christie Pitts, a city property. But because of the delay and the lack of equipment to do it, it just wasn't done. And that's why this motion, that's why the mayor put forward this motion. That's why I added to it this lens of equity, accessibility. I see that my time's not on, so I'm gonna in my mind mentally say where 5 minutes is. We've heard today this report, there are some disappointing elements to it. The fact that we went ahead and hired a consultant that's proposing 250 kilometers as a pilot, and yet we're turning it down and we don't know for what. For the low-hanging fruit. We don't know how many kilometers, we don't know where that might be. We at least need a better explanation than the very brief explanation they said about the lack of equipment in order for us to accept that what they're proposing is reasonable. I forgot, I was going to thank right off the bat former Councillor Janet Davis. The reason why this was constantly top of mind was because she kept making it top of mind. And while she's not here to actually see this report come through, I know that she's glad that we're having this conversation. She was able to add streets in her ward. Streets that looked very similar to the streets around them. And I'm not sure, with respect to staff, I'm not sure that there wasn't a fence on that street that was added, or a hedge. Other cities have managed to do this. We have reports of our city sidewalk plows that do our main streets just going down the side streets to clear some of the seniors, as well as some of the, and they do a little bit more along the way. It took me about 5 minutes of Googling to figure out that we can buy a more narrow snowplow. And you can actually put a brush attachment on the front, and that's what they use in some cities. About 5 minutes after being told time and time again they can't do winter maintenance if they put a curb on a bike lane. That was their rationale, or one of the rationales for not doing it. Or not doing a slightly more narrow lane where the full width that we'd like to didn't fit. Because of our plows, when you can easily buy a more narrow one. 5 minutes Googling, and came up with a distributor that distributes in Canada. I put this motion forward for a couple of reasons. I think our communities deserve a better rationale for why staff are recommending what they are. We need to know exactly what they're recommending. And the three at the end under C have to do with problems I experience on a regular basis. And as we've heard from Cycle Toronto, so do others, in that the level of clearing in bike lanes, while better, isn't great. I just want to say one comment on the survey, which I found there to be some excellent information within it. But one breakdown that wasn't given, with all the people that suggest that people are pretty happy with our level of snow clearing, they didn't break it down by areas that have their sidewalk clean and the ones they don't. They amalgamated everything together. Well, 2/3 of the city has their sidewalks clean, but the areas with the highest number of pedestrian activity don't. And so you got to think about the equity in this for the parent pushing the stroller, the individual with a mobility device. You got to think about this from an equity point of view that people in the downtown, the former city of Toronto, are paying the same amount into our snow clearing and yet not receiving the same level of service. And I think you also have to think about what we want to try to accomplish as part of something like Vision Zero, as part of something like the cycling plan of Transform TO. If we want to achieve higher levels of active transportation, we need to make it safer and more convenient for people to walk and to cycle during the wintertime, and that means clearing the roads and sidewalks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Any questions for the mover? Councillor Fletcher, you'd like to speak? Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome Councillors McKelvey and Cole to the annual snow clearing conversation at City Council. Okay, well, maybe you can crack the, maybe you can crack it. I'm just going to show, I just had one other thing. I'm just showing you this again, and remember I had the two pictures. I showed you the original, which was East York, which was agreed to after amalgamation, all of these streets. This is the former borough of East York. And then we have what gets snow cleared is the former borough of East York and the former city of Toronto along the Danforth. Now, these streets are cleaned with the same plows as are cleaned here. These streets are exactly the same as those streets there. So the notion that somehow we're unable to clean those, the other side of the Danforth, simply doesn't work. I do believe, I know it's all about money, it's all about money. But for Torontonians, it's all about service. And when Mr. Stamboulis said they're the most used and the least cleared, I believe him. So I'm just showing you from here down, those are all added, and those were added on as a pilot. Well, I think we should be adding more as a pilot, and we really have this conversation every single winter. Everybody's very frustrated. We have Vision Zero, we have pedestrian plans, we have increased bike lanes, and yet for the most vulnerable road users, that being pedestrians and cyclists, we still have issues where there are the most pedestrians and the most cyclists with separated bike lanes or non-separated bike lanes. So I'm looking forward to seeing the 311 calls. I'm going to suggest that Cycle Toronto works with its members to log every call to 311, so at the end of the season we can see where the high-performing clearances were and where the worst performing snow clearing was in the city. I get so many calls for bike lanes in my area to be cleared. Now, I also get a lot of calls for streets to be cleared because we have a system that's very difficult to get all that snow out of these very dense downtown neighborhoods. But I do have to say that the mentality of, maybe it's the mentality, maybe it's the issue, the orders that are issued, maybe it's the protocols, but for the life of me, I can't understand why a plow driver would leave that bike lane that we saw put up by Cycle Toronto in that condition. When you've done one pass, they obviously don't know there's a lane there. Why don't they know that's a street with a bike lane? Go once, make sure you've cleared that whole piece off. Same with Dundas. What is happening? It's a main commuter route. It's not cleared. And my residents went out last year and they shoveled it off to show that it needed to be shoveled. And I know we have a lot of cycling champions here. That would be you, Councillor Layton, and you, Councillor Deputy Mayor Denzelman and Wong. So I'm hoping that this year we can augment and get this right. But I'm also really looking to really clear information. How many seniors, how many streets on which seniors live are being cleared now? And how? And how can we have those streets cleared mechanically, the same as these streets were added with mechanical clearing, which are exactly the same configuration of these streets which get mechanical clearing. So Ms. Gray is relatively new. You haven't been through this. We started this, I think, in 2004, talking about these things. Has not yet been resolved. The mayor asked for this last year. I don't think we're there yet. I think we have more work to do, and I think the public who use the streets the most, that are least cleared, need better service in those areas. And I'm hoping that we can push this down the road a little bit and get things moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Cole?
Yeah, just briefly, Councillor Fletcher just perked my interest here. As you know, I was a former city councillor in East York. No, York. Yeah, York. The two Yorks. Anyways, yeah, I've been mistaken for him and Brian Ashton at times. But anyways, back in the city of York, I remember trying to get the city of York to install a salt box on a steep hill, so that, because local residents said, well, the salters don't come, so we want to go with our own shovel and put a little salt on the hill and the sidewalk. But anyway, they wouldn't give it to us. It was too expensive to put the salt box. I don't think they use salt boxes anymore. But anyway, so, I mean, this is a neighborhood by neighborhood issue, you know, and I represent a ward that includes 3 former municipalities. So think of the fun I'm having there, with different rules, with different legacies, with different bylaws, with different service accommodation. You know, I represent York, Toronto, North York. They're all into my mega ward. All I've learned over the last 3-4 decades, I can't remember anymore, is that the number of snow complaints and ice complaints is directly proportional to the number of extreme weather events. No matter what you do, how much money you spend, I know Mel had the trucks with the scoopers for the driveways. It always comes down to, if it's a bad winter and extreme changes like we're having with climate change now, with ice, snow, rain, the number of complaints, the number of calls to the office, emails, directly proportional to the weather. So that's why I think we've got to look at this comprehensively in a budget context, because there is no quick fix. There is no magic tiny plow that you Google has all the answers, and the Google plow is going to come up and plow our sidewalks. Let's do it comprehensively through the budget process and get it done to where we'll at least be able to do something that's comprehensive and, you know, has a very strategic approach to this, which the staff report really recommends.
Thank you, Councillor Cole. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Move staff recommendations.
Okay. Any other speakers? Councillor Perusa.
Yeah, first of all, I would hope that people don't just simply receive the report, but you send it on to council, because that's what he wants to do. You know, you read this report and it's like, it says, oh, just sunny days. Like everything's A-okay. Well, I'll tell you why it's not A-okay. Because as soon as a snow event is about to happen, each one of our offices goes on major alert, because that's when we receive the highest number of complaints of any other kind throughout the year, on anything. Why? Because it's just not sunny days. We are not doing this, we're not doing this well. In fact, I just took the 50 average snow events, multiplied them out, and I understand it's a little more complicated than this, multiplied them out by what, 24 hours per snow event, divided that into the 100 million, and I get $84,000 an hour. That's what it costs us. I understand it's more complicated than that. But in a simple way, that's what it works out to. And we get nothing but complaints. And that's not the whole picture. That doesn't include going out and filling in potholes. That's another 25 hot boxes, 50 crews when they say, when you have a blitz, some 20s, whatever number that is. But more importantly, what it does not include, what it does not include is the millions, the hundreds of millions of dollars at the back end because of our road degradation. Because we're not doing this well. So what happens is our roads break down faster. We need to rebuild them quicker. And we're paying through our bloody noses to do that. And nobody is happy. Because they're just full of potholes. We're not doing any of it well. Not because we're not spending a whack of money against it. We are. We just need to figure out, we need to look at it, and we need to figure out how it is that we're going to do this better. I understand a snowplow, you know, in North York we have window cleaning, windrow, whatever you call them, windrows, you know, the bottom of your driveway. I see the plows. You have a big snow event, plow's under a lot of pressure. That contractor's under a lot of pressure. He's got to keep going at a certain speed, right? You got more snow than he can see, so he doesn't see the curb, he doesn't clean the windrow. Just piles the snow up against the driveway. Why? Because he's afraid to put down the little plow because he's going too fast, he's going to clip the curb. Clips the curb, these guys back, you know, they go back to him for those fixes. Or, worse, breaks his plow. I wouldn't put that down either if I was the guy on that machine. Why? Because he's got to go at it lickety-split. Because he's being GPSed. He or she, sorry. So are we doing that? So we're paying for it, but we're not getting it most of the time. Especially when it's a big, especially when you need to get it. When it's a big, big snow event where that windrow really piles up, right? Where that snow, you know, because there's a lot of it that's being pushed back. Now when you get that little snowfall, you know, yeah, they can see that. They clear that. Beautiful. And we don't have the means because we've denied ourselves the means to be able to go and deal with it appropriately because we don't have the people power. So we bring in all these guys, they sit around our works yard, wait for the 40 to 60 snow events, whatever number that is, right? Go out and deal with the snow event. The rest of the time, some of them, I guess, are playing cards. The others are at home on standby, waiting around. But we're paying that $84,000 an hour. But our survey, which we pay $200,000 out of capital for, says that we got nothing but sunny days.
You're a little
the
over
only
5
sunny days
minutes,
happen in May.
Councillor
That's when
Peruzza.
everybody's happy. When all
And
the
I know
snow
you're
melts
getting the
away.
heart. I know you're getting the heart of your speech. But thank you very much. Are there any other speakers on this item before I share a few words? First of all, I want to thank staff for their work on this report, and of course, the data that's before us. I think it's an important discussion. We are getting more and more extreme weather events, and there's no doubt the accessibility of our city is essential. Regarding Councillor Peruzza's comments that nobody's happy with our snow clearing, the consultant's report actually has found that not to be correct. On page 13, it says that the overall majority, 57% of residents, are satisfied with the winter maintenance services provided by the City of Toronto. I think one of our big problems in the city is people, organizations, institutions, businesses don't know their responsibilities regarding snow clearance. I had a constituent who was downtown who parked in it was either Toronto Parking Authority or it was a private sector parking lot that was uncleared after a snowstorm, then tried to traverse a City of Toronto sidewalk, which was piled with snow, and then tried to walk to the Art Gallery of Ontario, which also had snowbanks and accessibility issues. And in that 20-meter walk, they came across 3 sets of jurisdictions who had different responsibilities for clearing. A parking lot, whether private sector or TPA, had a legal responsibility to clear it. City of Toronto had some kind of a pathway or what have you, which should have been probably cleared because of the situation of it. And of course, the Art Gallery of Ontario had a responsibility to clear its entranceways as well. Complicating matters are the small plazas in our various communities. These plazas have retail at grade with a small parking lot usually in front. The business operating out of that retail establishment is usually not the owner. They're renters of that establishment. And complicating the issue even more is there's usually a residence on top. And when you try and get these plaza owners or renters together for a uniform, cohesive snow removal plan, you usually run into problems because several don't want to pay. They also believe that it's the owner's responsibility and disputes come out that way. Or it's the retail outlet's responsibility, but the resident on top has to do their share too. So these messy jurisdictional disputes is one of the main problems we're having complaints in our offices. Regarding Councillor Layton's motion, I'm looking at it now. This is really something that should go to Budget Committee. This is a major line item that should go through the budgetary process 2020. I understand you're an esteemed member of the Budget Committee, and you might want to take it there. I can write you a letter of introduction to Budget Chief Crawford, but I don't think we need a divisive inner-city, inter-suburban debate at council over an extremely expensive item. I think some of these questions have already been answered in this report, in the consultant's report, which cost the city $200,000. So I'm not going to support Councillor Layton's motion, but as a member of the Budget Committee, of course, he's more than welcome to take that debate there. Fairness across the city, that's 600 square kilometers, that has a strong downtown core and widespread inner suburbs. Nothing will be ever fully equal. The downtown has high-level transit options that the inner suburbs only wish for. Bike lanes are far more established in the downtown core than what we get up in the inner suburbs. Bike share, we can't get bike share in the inner suburbs. I'm giving you some examples where things just aren't fair. That's the reality of a city that's 2.8 million people, and it covers a wide swath of geography. So with that, I would simply say that this can go to budget. You're more than welcome to bring it there, but a divisive debate at council, I don't think we have the stomach for it. I'm done, and I believe we're done with speakers, or does anyone else want to add to the conversation? Okay, so we can take Councillor Layton's motion first.
Recorded vote.
Okay, all those in favor?
Can you break it down? Can we vote on them separately?
We can vote ad seriatim. How would you like it broken down? The whole thing? Okay, so no, we're not going to break it down. It's the will of the committee. All those in favor?
All those in favor of the motion before you, Councillor Layton, Councillor Perruzza, all those against? Councillor Cole, Councillor McKelvey, Councillor Pasternak, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong. That motion fails.
And Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong has moved the staff report, staff recommendations. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item 8.7. All right, okay, so we were holding an item for Councillor McKelvey, 8.5. We can go back to that. Flood mitigation and damage repair for Toronto's waterfront and Toronto Island Park. There's a presentation, staff presentation.
Mr. Chair, if I can just introduce the presentation. We were requested to do, we were directed to do a presentation, so I think that was in the motion.
I can't remember directing that. No, I don't remember doing it at all. It's a will committee. If you want to hear the presentation, what are we looking at, Ms. Romanov? Are we looking at 5 minutes?
5 to 10 minutes maximum.
Okay, so let's hear the presentation. No, I said we're okay. Oh, we're okay, we don't want it. Oh, I thought you were saying we're okay with the 5 to 10 minutes. No. Well, you know what? I'm sure it's a lovely presentation. And you've come all this way. It's TRCA?
Yeah, I'd like to hear the presentation. Let's hear it. Let's have a private presentation.
Well, I'm on the TRCA, so I have to advocate for the organization. I will support the presentation if we can keep it under 10 minutes. How do you feel about that? Gosh. All right, please, come forward. Let's hear your presentation.
So maybe just while
Welcome to City Hall, by the way.
while they're setting up, I just want to introduce Jet, Matt, and Rihanna from the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, who've been our partners on the flood mitigation and damage repair report that you see before you. Jet, Matt, and Rihanna, correct? Jet, Matt, and Rihanna, who are going to introduce themselves and the work that we've been doing in partnership with TRCA on the response to the flood. And they promise to be less than 10 minutes.
Yes, and anything that you weren't able to deliver in your presentation, you might be able to incorporate as we ask questions.
And members of the committee, colleagues, my name is Rehan Rajabali, and I should have thought of a juicier title for this presentation, perhaps something along the lines of Water World. We'll try to condense it into 10 minutes or less, and I'm here with my colleagues, Matt and Jet, to speak about Toronto Island's flooding and mitigation. So quickly, we'll go over the Great Lakes watersheds, factors that influence Lake Ontario levels, a comparison of the 2017-2019 conditions, and how lessons learned in the interim helped provide a more effective response to the high levels this year. And then we'll talk a little bit about the highlights from the flood mitigation report, which is the subject of item 8.5. So quickly, a quick lesson on hydrology of Lake Ontario. There are 3 main factors that influence the Lake Ontario levels. The first of these is the inflow from Lake Erie, which is uncontrolled. And it is notable because this year Lake Erie is higher than it's ever been before, and it continues to be at record high levels, which does, continue to be a factor as to why we have higher than average levels through the fall. The second is precipitation, as in rain or snowmelt, that drains directly into Lake Ontario from the surrounding watershed. So this is the area in blue on the map. And then the third is outflow from Lake Ontario, which is controlled by the International Joint Commission at the Moses Saunders Dam. Now, Lake Ontario is an international water body, and the International Joint Commission has a set of prescribed rules that are used in order to operate that dam to balance the risks upstream along the shoreline of Lake Ontario with the risks downstream through the St. Lawrence River. And one of the key factors that influences how that upstream-downstream balance is done is what's happening on the Ottawa River watershed. So that area in yellow on the map is the drainage area for the Ottawa River. And the Ottawa River joins the St. Lawrence River upstream of Montreal. And so whatever is happening in the Ottawa River, if it is peaking, then the outflows from Lake Ontario are controlled in order to prevent simultaneous peaks going through the St. Lawrence River, resulting in flooding in Montreal and along communities on the St. Lawrence. So this is governed by the IJC, and each of these 3 factors, the uncontrolled inflow from Lake Erie, the amount of water and rainfall and snowmelt in the Lake Ontario watershed, as well as the outflow from Lake Ontario, all work in combination to dictate what the Lake Ontario levels would be. And I did mention Lake Erie as one of those factors, and it is notable that Lake Erie is higher than it has ever been before. And in 2019, this was one of the big drivers for the high levels on Lake Ontario. When I mentioned the upstream-downstream risk, here you can see a 1 centimeter drawdown on Lake Ontario would result in an 11 to 12 centimeter increase in water levels at Montreal. And so it does have kind of a bit of a disproportional impact in terms of explicit water level between what happens around Lake Ontario and downstream. So we've seen high lake levels 2 out of the last 3 years. And in fact, there are some similarities between what happened in 2017 and 2019. What's similar is that we had record high levels. The actual peak level that we saw in 2019 was ever so slightly higher. On an average, a daily average, it was about 2 centimeters higher, so 75.95 versus 75.93 in 2017. But among the key differences in terms of the water level itself was that it was high for a much longer period of time. We did see slightly higher instantaneous water levels, higher than we've ever recorded before on Lake Ontario, of just over 76 meters. And because it was so prolonged, so much of the summer, you know, we were under this shoreline hazard warning. Because it was so prolonged, the odds that we caught winds from directions that are not preferable was much higher. So there were longer duration of having, you know, areas submerged, plus there was a longer period of time at which we got a lot more windstorms, more storm surge effects, more wave impacts, more SAISH. And so in fact, hydrologically speaking, 2019 was much worse than 2017. But if you talk to people, you know, the reaction in terms of the impacts that were felt by the average person were probably lesser. And a lot of that is owing to the fact that there was a lot more preparedness and that we used the lessons learned in 2017 to help inform the, you know, response and the emergency mitigation measures that were put into place in 2019. In 2017, you know, it was also more an issue of the rainfall overall in the Lake Ontario basin, whereas in 2019, even once outflows were drastically increased coming out of Lake Ontario, the inflow from Lake Erie was so high that that contributed to the very, very prolonged peak level that we saw this summer. And so again, here it is, graphically speaking. If you take a look, you know, if you consider for us a shoreline hazard warning, an important elevation is 75.7 meters. And if you look at it, it was above that for, you know, about 2.5 months. So it really illustrates how much longer we had to deal with these high water levels this year. Unfortunately, the forecast isn't looking so good either. And this is an older forecast, so I should probably skip through to the later one I'll show you. But this illustrates what we were dealing with back then, and I have the newer forecast that incorporates how we've seen the lake levels decline. To me, I look at it as a graph, and that might be meaningful, but to most people, this is what they see when they think of Lake Ontario high levels. It's not just inundation, but it's also erosion, and this results in significant damages, not just, you know, at the time when the static water level is high, but at the time also where you have seasonally high water levels, plus, you know, ice storms coming in, plus wave impacts coming in. So the effects we've seen over the last 3 years, not just on the islands, but along the entire waterfront, has been quite significant. Now, the Conservation Authority has been supporting the City of Toronto's response for high lake levels in a couple of ways. One of them, of course, is in terms of providing boots-on-the-ground support to help place emergency mitigation measures. Another of those is through collecting and cataloging these impacts to be able to support longer-term mitigation measures. And one of the innovations this year was the tool that you see before you here, where we were able to track all of the different impacts. And very recently, City of Toronto staff ourselves met with the Great Lakes Adaptive Management Committee, who is the body responsible for trying to understand that balance of upstream and downstream impacts. And so those lessons learned from 2017 are one of the reasons why there was an ability to better undertake emergency response during 2019's high levels. So an example of what worked really beautifully on the islands this year are these sumps. With the sumps in place, the pumps were much more effective at draining of any of the water that ended up overtopping some of the sandbags and whatnot that were placed. Back in 2017, over 46,000 sandbags were put into place. We always use the 2017 numbers because in 2019 it was less a matter of placing new sandbags, since some of what was placed in 2017 was cut, left in place, and utilized and naturalized as a berm. And so recognizing that the idea isn't to continue to do emergency response, right after 2017, the City of Toronto requested TRCA to look at long-term mitigation measures. And so the subject of 8.5 is the study, is a summary of the components of the flood mitigation and characterization and mitigation alternatives. So there's 4 components to the study. The first is flood characterization. This looked at, what was the nature of the flood in 2017. It was updated in 2019 as well to provide projections of the 100-year, the 500-year water levels to help, give an idea to what needs to be done in terms of design for mitigation alternatives. There was a flood risk assessment, which helped quantify the damages in order to help provide the benefits side of a return on investment calculation. There were, of course, the flood maps, which we used to help target response, and then the flood mitigation alternatives report. Now, the flood mitigation alternatives report is looking at areas, that have conceptual designs. These are not detailed designs. We're not at that point yet. What we looked at were areas that could be, prevented from flooding through more permanent measures. So things like that are perimeter berms plus drainage areas, the raising of roads, as well as the protection of critical infrastructure. And when we talk about flood protection, you want it to have multiple benefits. Again, conceptual ideas for having something that tries to keep the water out, but also provides community, benefits. So here we are. Where are we at this point? The risk assessment was done. The conceptual alternatives were already developed through the study that TRCA worked with the consultant to develop. And now we're at the point where you have to sort them, secure funding, and then look at the next steps, some of which are environmental assessments and some of which would move directly to detailed design. And so here we are working with our municipal partners to secure funding and move towards the implementation. And I have one more slide I'd like to just share, which is that forecast, which shows that because especially with Lake Erie being so high, things are not looking so good for the next year. If you look at that what they do is they give a cone of probability. And if you just take kind of the 50%, the average out of that dotted red line in the middle, you can see that it's very, very likely that we're going to see above average conditions again in 2020. And there's certainly a possibility that we could be looking at those record highs again in the next year. So it is important that we continue to look towards long-term mitigation, and we're open to any questions that the committee might have. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Right on time. A very important discussion. So we have 2 choices. One is we can go questions for the deputants and then go to staff, or do you want to just or do them together? It's
yeah, because some of them might be more relevant for TRCA and some for the cities.
okay. So we can actually open it up to both if you'd like to. The deputants could stay there if they want. So we're going to combine our questions for staff and questions for deputants as well. So Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering if you could walk through jurisdictionally who's responsible for this, and I'll leave it to whoever wants to do it, but it seems that the feds, the province, the city, TRCA all have a role. So I guess my question is, who's responsible for finding the problems, who's responsible for fixing the problems, and who's responsible for funding that?
Hello, my name is Matt Johnston. I'm the Senior Manager of Erosion Risk Management with TRCA. And through you, Chair, it's a complex problem in terms of the responsibility. I would say from a municipal level, when it comes to mitigating erosion risks and then flood management, the TRCA works very closely with its municipal partners throughout our jurisdiction to ensure that an appropriate level of service is administered and the constituents within those communities are protected from those hazards. But ultimately, where the responsibility lies can transcend and can be debated based on property boundaries, external influencing factors. So there's a lot of issues that go into that. And the province and the federal government often provides support through a variety of grant programs and other elements of their work. But I would say that it seems there's more involvement from the municipality level and I'd say from the Toronto Region Conservation Authority to help mitigate these issues.
If I can, through the chair, just to add, I think a good way of summarizing it as well is that the Toronto Region Conservation Authority would really be the subject matter experts on flood and flood mitigation, as that's their primary role and responsibility. So defining what the issues are, defining what the responses can be, and then I think on the municipal side, also on the funding side, we become the partners in helping deliver the response and the mitigation to it.
So I think it's more complex than that, right? Like, so this is federal waters, it's an international border. And then the Toronto Region and Conservation Authority, if I'm right, like your responsibility really and mandate under your legislation is riverine and riverine flooding, not necessarily lacustrine, right?
Through the chair and through you, Madam Vice Chair. It does include erosion and hazards from the lake as well. So TRCA does have a mandate to undertake regulation off of lake-based hazards, as well as considering erosion and flood risks from lacustrine hazards as well. That extends to flood forecasting and warning and emergency response as we continue to do, but that also extends to the providing the subject matter expertise to support mitigation. But I guess where it gets tricky is that there is no, because we are funded through a combination largely through partner municipalities, with some contribution from the province as well, there is no explicit budget for any particular activity. It's on a site-by-site basis through supporting agencies.
So so somebody has to identify the problems, not totally clear who that is from my line of question. You can do the work because you're experts in doing that work, but then ultimately it needs to be funded by the municipality, the province, or the feds, or some combination of the both? But it's not clear who exactly is responsible, because we're flooded because we're protecting Montreal, right? So we're not in control of those dams and those water levels, but we're subject to those impacts. So the federal government should have some role if they're the ones that are determining that level ultimately, right?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the water levels in Lake Ontario are controlled by the International Joint Commission, which is a binational panel between the U.S. and Canada. It was set up when the St. Lawrence Seaway was created, and it was designed to regulate the lake levels through the dam in Cornwall. It, in essence, was to allow for proper flow regulation in St. Lawrence, so you could have shipping come up in a controlled fashion. So they are the body that are responsible for setting lake levels. There was a recent change to lake level control and the amount of flow released from Cornwall in 2014. They made some changes to that, and from our perspective in Toronto Water, there is some concern because since that change in 2014, we've now seen 2 episodes of significant lake levels. Is it correlated or not? I don't know if we have enough data yet to say that. However, it does concern us because it affects more than just erosion on the islands. Right. You're now getting into a number of major infrastructure issues in the way that we drain the city. Right. There's outfalls that go out all along the front of the city, and the way they're designed is like any drain in a house. They flow by gravity out, and if the lake levels are higher, we are not draining the lower part of our city well.
So it looks like we need a little bit more of a strategy around this, given that this is likely going to happen again, right? Like, based on what you're seeing, like, this is likely going to happen again.
So in response to you, Madam Vice Chair, there are, and also to speak a little bit on the last point, indeed, there is control over the outflow for Lake Ontario, but that does not provide full control over the lake level, because there are those other 2 factors which are uncontrolled which still influence the lake level. So it absolutely is one of the portions, right? Controlling how much gets out of the lake will influence it and does absolutely have a significant influence, and did so because if you look at what's in common between 2017 and 2019, what's in common is that the Ottawa River flooded both times. So there is absolutely a relationship there. Now, under both the previous and the current regulation, the deviations that occurred, the actual flow control decisions that were made, deviated from both of those plans. And so one of the reports, because we too were interested in this question, as was the city, one of the reports does look at what the impact of Plan 2014 was on Lake Ontario levels in 2017. And some portion of the increase to the 100-year level, about 7 centimeters according to Part 1, the flood characterization report, is ascribable to the change in regulation planning. And that's ascribable to the way that the larger variation of appropriate, acceptable lake levels are prior to getting into flood stages. Once you start to get into flood stages, they actually don't follow the plan anymore. The board meets and approves deviation, and that happened in 2017, and that happened in 2019 again.
So do you have mapped along the waterfront then whose jurisdiction each portion is? So for example, the Rouge Park parking lot was flooded and we had damage and there was a lot of, are you responsible or who's responsible? Like, have we mapped out who has responsibility over all of the different areas of our waterfront? Because it's not clear right now who you're going to call, because I got a lot of runaround over that.
I would say from an identification perspective, we provide that, to be able to identify where the hazards are. But as far as the responsibility, it largely lays on whose infrastructure, right, it is. And that ultimately determines where the funding comes from.
And just to clarify and add another point of complexity, a lot of the shoreline erosion control structures, TRCA might have ownership of those assets from that we originally built them and we maintain them. But there's also a lot of that parkland which is under management agreement with the city. So you have TRCA-owned lands with the City of Toronto actually being the ones who would be the management in terms of parks, forestry, and recreation. So there's a lot of joint responsibilities, and that's why TRCA and the city work very closely in identifying all these hazard areas. Following the 2017 event, we had detailed inventories completed separately of the impacts, and in regards to 2019, we've just been waiting for the water levels to recede a bit before we can go out to actually inspect all of our assets in all of the most impacted areas, because as of right now, we still haven't been able to do that with the water levels slowly receding. So to kind of answer your question, there isn't, I don't think, a clear visible external layer of that information specifically, but there's pretty clear operational in terms of TRCA and the city with respect to who should be following up on those issues and where the source of the funding would come from to remedy them.
That's your last question. Other questions for the deputants or for staff? Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Lots of rain in the last little while, yes? Lots of flooding? Is that yes?
Certainly a little bit quieter on the riverfront this year, but for lake-based flooding, absolutely it was.
Portlands. Was there any flooding on the Portlands?
Through the chair. The Portlands, they're typically built a little bit higher, right? There is a slightly higher dock wall on there. So one of the other considerations I should point out is that when there is design work done on other areas of redevelopment, such as the Portlands, which are undergoing a flood protection program, river-based flooding and lake-based flooding work a little bit differently. The likelihood of seeing both of those peaks coincide is historically low, but most importantly, the likelihood of seeing
low.
It is. That's a good point. Typically, lake peak flooding occurs in June, whereas these large synoptic storms that tend to provide the worst case scenario for rainfall that we've seen tend to be the larger spring and fall based storms.
Do you have any knowledge of the Portlands ever flooding?
Through the chair, the Portlands have historically flooded sometimes from spills from riverine.
No, do you know when it ever flooded?
In my experience, through the chair, I can't recall, but I know that during...
How about you, Lou?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Flooding, as we see overland flow flooding, no. We have not seen any major...
No flooding on the Portland?
Not that I'm not in my career.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Let me go down that path then. Sure. The idea that if any place is hit by Hurricane Hazel, it's underwater, right, Lou?
Through you, Mr. Chair.
As a general statement.
As a general statement, if you experience the rain intensity that you experienced during Hurricane Hazel, you will have significant overland flow flooding in any part of the city.
Right.
And as well, you will get riverine flooding happening on the floodplain.
No, because this is an important point, because people say that the regulatory event is Hurricane Hazel, but for us to protect the city, and Hurricane Hazel was geographically it was a targeted area, just when we have all those other rainstorms, it's not the full area of the city. But the city cannot, the enormity of trying to protect the city of Toronto against Hurricane Hazel, the enormity of that job is almost impossible to comprehend, both in terms of scale and in terms of cost. Is that an overstatement?
Mr. Chair, no, that's not an overstatement, and that's what we reported many times with our basement flooding reports, that we cannot protect the city from those extreme storm events, and the regional storm would be the most extreme storm event.
So if King and Bay were hit with Hurricane Hazel underwater, right?
You would have substantial flooding in the roadways and in basements, because you would overload not only the sewer systems, but all of the overland flow routes, so you would see
Yonge and Bloor,
significant flooding.
Kennedy and Lawrence, same thing.
Yes, and any location where you're getting that intensity of rainfall, you'll get overland flow flooding, which then eventually leads to riverine flooding.
Bathurst and Bloor. Bathurst and Lawrence.
Any location.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I was trying to get all the committee members their wards.
You missed Bathurst and Wilson.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? I just have a couple of. Thank you, Councillor Baruza. No, his time is up, and you can take it offline. I guess the Baird report didn't really. I guess this is sort of a combination of mostly to staff. No offense. The Baird report didn't really give a cost of mitigation actions. It's not in the damage estimates, but on page 3, I think, of the staff report, it's 13.9 to 15.9 million. Is that your rough estimate to make permanent remediation, to have a permanent remediation strategy?
I'll respond to that question. I'd say at a preliminary level, that number is accurate for rough estimating. However, there do have to be a lot of refinements from that. Another recommendation that I want to draw specific attention from Baird's report is about $550,000 will be required for further studies and as well for EA, environmental assessment completion. In order to determine the viability of some of those structures, some of the berms and other seawalls, there needs to be some geotechnical investigative work undertaken, and specifically to determine how permeable or the hydraulic conductivity of those soils. So once there's refinements through the environmental assessment process, I think those estimates will have to be reviewed, but for now they're reasonable assumptions. And a lot of that is the road work that was mentioned, as there's many spots on the island that would immediately benefit from raising of the road. And that's, I think, $12 million if I'm recalling the number correctly from the report. So a large portion of that is road construction, not even berm and seawall construction.
And to staff, is there a funding source for this? Is this an unfunded strategy? Do we have the money?
So, Mr. Chair, so we are, and there's a letter before you from Councillor Cressy around including the environmental assessment required in the 2020 budget, which we can do from within the allocation. So that's the $550,000 that's required to do the further assessment that TRCA is speaking about, but the actual $13 to $15 million is not yet identified in the budget. I think the plan would be to finish the assessment, the environmental assessment, refine the numbers that are required, and then put them in subsequent budget submissions.
Okay, thank you. To the General Manager, Toronto Water, do we have when it comes to capital upgrades in basement flooding areas that have had an environmental assessment, do we have a cap of $32,000 per household?
Yes, Mr. Chair. One of the criteria that Council approved when we created the latest iteration of the basement flooding program was for us to assess the stormwater infrastructure, and that we could raise the service level from the present 2 to 5 year storm return storms to a 100-year level. However, the caveat being that we could only proceed with them if the cost to implement it was less than $32,000 per benefiting household.
So based on the $13.9 to $15.9 million cost here and 260 households on the island, my rough math is that's a little over $61,000 per household. How would this ever qualify for those kinds of dollars?
Mr. Chair, this is not being funded from the basement flooding program. That particular criteria was specific to any allocations in Toronto Water's basement flooding funding file. This is being funded, my understanding, directly through the property tax base, not through Toronto Water.
And Mr. Chair, I should also, just to add to Lou's comments, that when we're talking about raising the road and some of the other things that are identified in this report, these are items that are very specific to the park as well, and from the usability of the park.
Okay, thank you. I'm done. Speakers? Councillor McKelvey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lake Ontario was about 85 centimeters above normal for the time of year in summer, and we also had high lake levels in 2017. So I think we have to accept that this is quite likely going to be the new normal, and we need to prepare for that. But it's, as you heard from the responses to my questions, jurisdictionally, who's responsible is very complicated. And I think we need to find a way to map this out so that we can have quick response. So we immediately know who's responsible. And most importantly, so that we have a continued long-term funding stream for this, because the upgrades in infrastructure that we have are going to be enormous, because our infrastructure was all designed with a much lower lake level in mind, and probably some of the lowest lake levels we may have even seen is what we're using for our design criteria. So we need to update that as well. I have had conversations as well with Councillor Crawford's office. I know they're also very concerned, as are other colleagues, about this continued problem that we can expect. Also concerning through this report is that it has a broad focus on the Toronto Islands, and there is a whole lot of other waterfront that we have that we need to think about. And I feel like we're not doing it enough justice through this report. It's not clear who finds the problem, who fixes the problem, who funds the problem, and we really need to be prepared for more erosion, which is clear, that's TRCA jurisdiction, but a lot of the other stuff's not. TRCA is responsible for riverine flooding. It was created in response to Hurricane Hazel, a very specific problem, and it wasn't designed for lacustrine or high Lake Ontario levels and dealing with that. So it's not clear who the appropriate body is. I don't think we'll solve that, obviously, in this report today, but it is something that I will continue to be asking hard questions about. I'm also prepared to help work on a solution in any way. And at some point, I think we're going to have to bring all the important players behind that, be it TRCA, the province, the feds, and the municipality together to map this out. And we're doing that with the resilience strategy for the lacustrine flooding and looking for the flooding that happens when our municipal infrastructure can't keep up with our sewage systems, for example, but we're not doing it in the same way, coherent way for the lake. And you can expect to hear more from me and my other council colleagues on that going forward.
Thank you, Councillor McKelvey. Any other speakers? Councillor Layton,
Yes,
I
my
understand
apologies.
you're very
I'm
anxious
sorry.
to speak.
I'm sorry. I
Oh, no,
had my
that's
hand
okay.
up earlier, but
Councillor Layton, please.
I have a motion on behalf of the local councillor that the General Manager, Parks, Forestry and Recreation, in consultation with the TRCA, report directly to the October 29 and 30th meeting of City Council with recommendations to advance next steps associated with the implementation of long-term flood mitigation alternatives in the Toronto Islands as soon as possible, including but not limited to the initiating the required Conservation Authority class environmental assessment for remedial flood and erosion control, and an outline of the steps and timelines. B, an update on projects related to the Toronto Islands flood mitigation and damage repair, both short and long-term, either funded, scheduled, or underway. So for the local councillor, this is a big issue because there was a very different response between 2007 and 2019, where the flooding was actually worse, but the response was far better because we had been through this before. Unfortunately, though, there is a lot of stuff that needs to be done, a lot of work that needs to be done, but the report is light in how we actually and who is actually going to carry that out. And that's why the local councillor who submitted a letter, and it should have been circulated, so his rationale is down there, is he would like more clarity. And I suspect it's to give the community some assurance that the city and the TRCA is actually taking action to ensure that their homes are protected and that this important public facility, public asset is protected from what we know is a changing climate. These floods aren't going away. They're going to get worse. So I put these forward on his behalf. I don't think it's not slowing anything down. I think the local community, though, deserves some clarity in who's doing what and how fast in response to the emergency on the island. Thank you.
Any other speakers on the item? Oh, we have the one motion. We can put it on the screen. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. The item is amended. We're good. Okay. Go to item 8.7. There's speakers on the item. Automated Vehicle Tactical Plan and Readiness 2022. Ben Grush.
Is there one? Thank you. And
Thank you very much for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Bern Grush. I'm a resident of Toronto and an author of a textbook and several independent reports about preparing for automated vehicles. I commend the work of the city staff who produced the draft automated vehicles tactical plan and the direction of city council that instigated this effort. Thank you for that. At the outset, I want council to know that the attention given to the hardware and software for automated vehicles is consumerist and somewhat misdirected. The real problem, the hardest problem, is getting this right for massive urban transportation systems for whole cities. Toronto has taken on a hard job. I thank you, councillors, again for instigating this. My comments today are related to an unintended contradiction between what the City of Toronto and the Province of Ontario propose to do about automated vehicles. The city's draft automated vehicles tactical plan proposes deployment readiness for workability and livability. Commendably, this plan points towards social health and environmental concerns, as well as integration with public transit, increased efficiency, and many other important urban issues. The province, in its October 2019 Autonomous Vehicle Innovation Network report, points us toward technology leadership, product innovation, and manufacturing, among other related issues. As evidence of these two biases, I have some word count comparisons I would like you to consider. Words related to access, affordability, blind, disabled, employment, environment, ride-hailing, income, senior, sharing, social equity, sustainability, taxis, transit, Uber, Lyft, and the wheelchair appear 3.1 times more often in a city document than in a provincial document. Words related to advertising, gaming, purchasing, shopping, social media, and video were 11 times more likely to appear in a provincial document than in a city document. Fundamentally, the economic program of the province is focused on jobs, exports, and consumption, and this tends to drive us toward private automobile ownership and its attendant difficulties with which we are all familiar, especially the pothole problem we've heard a lot about. Fundamentally, and by contrast, the livability and urban mobility management approach drafted by the city nudges us toward transit and vehicle sharing rather than vehicle ownership. It envisions a more desirable or livable city. Each of these two levels of government are understandable in their guidance. The province's bias is important to our economic health. The city's bias is critical to our urban health, including potentially parking land recovery and repurposing for residential, commercial, and recreational purposes. I am asking the City of Toronto to explicitly note that the province's current AV program track, as evidenced in the AVEN documentation, is in part contradictory to the city's draft AV tactical plan. This contradiction could mean the unintended consequence of the city's effort being partially negated by the provincial effort, that is, by encouraging private vehicle ownership. This contradiction can be mitigated by the city communicating to the province an interest in realizing the fruits of Canadian-based automated vehicle development, specifically aimed at the rising urban worldwide market for shared mobility applications. For-hire, on-demand ride services from regulated common carrier organizations are likely to be the dominant and potentially near-exclusive domain of driverless vehicles because of the inherent danger and complexity in authorizing private citizen ownership and the use of robotic machines on public roads. The city should proceed with the proposed AV tactical plan while influencing the provincial direction toward a path of vehicle development that modernizes public transportation to include convenient door-to-door mobility where and when appropriate across all hours in all neighborhoods and all users with a clear view to the needs of the mobility disadvantaged. With the help of the province, this service can emerge from the automated, well-managed fleets of the future that may often be provided by private sector, but harmonized with the city's interest in achieving cost-effective, sustainable, optimized, and equitable use of its public roadway infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the deputant? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Judy Farvolden.
Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and the committee for providing me with this opportunity to speak to you on the release of the Automated Vehicles Tactical Plan. I'm Dr. Judy Farvolden, the Executive Director of the University of Toronto Transportation Research Institute, which we call UTRI. UTRI aims to make transportation research meaningful and useful to its partners in government and industry. I'm proud to represent the work of researchers from across the University of Toronto, and we are proud to count the City of Toronto among our government partners. So the first sentence of the AV Tactical Plan has 3 important words: plan, actionable, and prepare. We have to prepare for the advent of automated vehicles on our roads so we can steer towards the good outcomes they can provide and away from the bad outcomes they may result in. For that, the city needs to be armed with a plan. A plan defines actionable steps, milestones, and measures of progress, all of which I found in the AV Tactical Plan. As revolutionary as automated vehicle technology might be, it should not change the way we run our cities. Planners still need to plan the city we want to live in, professional staff need to plan and deliver services and infrastructure, and elected officials need to make important decisions about those services, that infrastructure, and those plans. So it should give us confidence that the tactical plan doesn't create a new vision. It's organized around 7 directions drawn from existing plans and guidelines that reflect the cities of Toronto's strategic visions. The goals describe what success would look like in 2050. The plan defines tactics to achieve those goals, and measures along the way and key performance measures that connect the goals and the tactics so you see how well you're doing. We're fond of saying you can't manage what you can't measure. The tactical plan provides a framework that can be used to measure and therefore manage the successful adoption of AV technology in the city. The promise of automated vehicles is that they will take us further, faster, in more comfort and more safely than we traveled before. And that's exactly what we were told when the automobile was introduced in the last century. And indeed, the advent of the automobile created unprecedented GDP growth, logistics networks that brought a multitude of products to our doorsteps and let us hit the road just for fun. And it worked really well until it didn't. And then congestion began to eat away at those economic gains. The transportation sector became the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, and unequal access to opportunities like jobs created equity gaps. The transportation sector is being disrupted, and maybe that's a good thing, because can we agree that business as usual is not working? And the situation will worsen as our population grows. Simply taking the driver out of the vehicle does not change the fact that a car is still a car, and traveling alone in a personal automobile without a driver is still driving in a single occupancy vehicle. More of them generating more vehicle kilometers traveled will not improve our mobility. That's why it's important that the tactical plan promotes space-efficient and active modes of travel. The tactical plan will measure how well automated vehicles complement, rather than compete with, transit, shared, and active mobility. Maybe, if properly implemented, automated vehicles can provide an effective solution for the first mile, last mile problem, and maybe it can help us to achieve seamless integrated mobility. Being a for-profit company in the new mobility space has its challenges, but generally speaking, a day in the life of a for-profit company is simple. Run your company to grow the bottom line. Whereas a day in the life of running the city is one of complex decision-making in interests of diverse stakeholders addressing critical needs in the face of uncertainty with unlimited financial resources. The AV Tactical Plan will guide the city through this complex decision-making in its allocation of scarce resources to develop policies that harness AVs for the public good. The Tactical Plan also addresses city operations in terms of public service vehicles, future-proofing, and data governance. Under future-proofing of its various plans, like the Congestion Management Plan, the Tactical Plan underscores the need to underscore the impacts of automated vehicles on travel demand. UTRI has a long history and extensive experience in modeling, simulation, data, and analytics in support of evidence-based decision-making. We're exceedingly well-positioned to support the city in understanding the impacts of automated vehicles on travel demand, and indeed, we already are. We're the home of the Data Management Group, which has administered the Transportation Tomorrow survey since 1986. We are the developers of the GTA model travel demand forecasting models that city planning has used for all strategic transportation planning studies for the past 20 years. Apropos AV, we have a current research collaboration precisely to investigate and quantify the impacts of AVs under various alternative future scenarios, with the explicit goal of helping policy and decision makers to prepare for the pervasive impacts and disruptions of AVs. I have a few things I'd like to say about that I would like to recommend, which is please preserve access to data. UTRI aspires to support our government partners with evidence in support of decision-making. Where is evidence-based decision-making without data? So while protecting privacy, it's important that the city has access to the data it needs to understand the transportation and mobility needs of its residents and the demand new mobility service providers are placing on our public infrastructure on the roads and at the curbside. Please continue to take a leadership position. I believe the AV Tactical Plan will be one of the definitive references of what is known and understood to date about AV technology and preparedness, and provides a robust plan that many jurisdictions will consider for guidance in drafting their own plans. Please continue to create opportunities for partnership and collaboration. The AV team is well known and respected for its contributions and is productively exploiting our opportunities for pilots and partnerships. UTRI is grateful to be among those partners and to be supporting those pilot projects. In closing, I'd like to say that UTRI has been involved in the city's AV initiative since the initial workshops in March 2015, produced the discussion paper Driving Changes and the workshops in 2016. We look forward to continuing to support the city through our various research programs. We invite you to visit us so that you can learn more about what we do and find out other ways that we can support the city. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to address the committee.
Thank you for your deputation. Are there questions for the deputant? Okay, I have some questions, if that's okay. Do you want to time me? Sure. I don't know how this works. All right, there you go. So you mentioned single occupancy, and you do some modeling. So how do you forecast that, and how do you have recommendations yet on how we might be able to regulate that in the future?
So to the first part of the question, we forecast that by having
first travel demand surveys that tell us across the city of, actually the Greater Toronto and Hamilton region, when people wake up in the morning, where do they want to get to? How are they going to get there, and why are they going there? And that's a 5% sample survey across the region that we then scale up. Then we have simulation models that take all those people and flow them over the network to see where the demand actually lands in terms of transit and private vehicles, increasingly walking and cycling as well. And we can put different scenarios on the transportation choices that people have as the costs of different modes change. You know, transit fares go up, transit fares go down as new capacity is added to the network. So that's the way that we've been doing things for years. What we're doing in the work that we're doing together with the city is expanding those models to consider when automated vehicles are added as a new mode choice. So as exciting as the new technology may be, it's just really another way of getting around. Right. A new mode. Where there will be no driver in the car, and that may change the cost structure for people, and it may change their perception of the cost of their travel time, because if they're freed from driving to do something else along the way, they may be more willing to travel longer distances. Okay. But we don't know that yet. We don't know what the induced demand of automated vehicles will be. We know that ride-hailing services have created demand that wasn't there before to travel, as people choose to put up their hands or pull out their phones to take a short trip rather than to take transit, rather than to walk, rather than sometimes to use their own vehicles. But we know that's induced demand. We suspect, but we don't know, that automated vehicles will also increase the demand for travel, and that if some of that travel is in single occupancy vehicles, that will just put more vehicles on our roads.
It's something we should be monitoring or watching as we roll out.
I would say to be more proactive than monitoring and watching. I
Right.
mean, this is a few years out. How far out is a matter of debate. I think we have some time. But what we believe will be true is that if everybody just hops in their own automated vehicle and hits the road, we're going to have worse congestion. What we need to be doing is working on attitude and behavior change and encouraging more, we've talked about the future being connected, automated, shared, and electric. So we need to work on the sharing aspect and develop services, some of which will be transit as we understand it now, some of which may be new mobility services that are under development, so that we get more people moving in shared services, which will reduce the total vehicle kilometer travels per person, rather than seeing those vehicle kilometers traveled increase person by person by person.
Great, thank you. I'm going to pass the chair back to Councillor Pasternak. You want chair back? Oh, no. Oh, okay, I'm not. All right, I'm going to stay sitting here. All right, Councillor Cole had a question.
Thank you. Should I go doctor or professor? How would you like to be called?
Dr. Farvolden's fine. I'm not a professor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming. I'm sure you are constantly engaged in looking at the impacts of automated vehicles, and with your academic background, and you're right in the front lines of this. I recall back in the 90s when we were trying to promote the expansion of the public transit system and putting money into it, and there was a huge argument at that time saying, well, don't waste your money by investing in subways or public transit, because the age of telecommuting is coming, and people will just work from home. You won't need public transit as much, so don't waste your time by inventing. So subsequently, we de-invested in public transit at that time because we were told, oh no, it's going to be all telecommuting. People work at their computers at home. You won't need anything. I'm just wondering, with this emphasis on automated vehicles, changing the dynamics of how people work, travel, etc., is there going to be basically a de-emphasis on investing in mass transit, let's say, because people are going to say, well, no, we don't need mass transit because we've got all these automated vehicles running around?
People say that. People do talk about that. I think it's. I don't think it's good reasoning. If we were taking a snapshot this morning and people's travel to work today, there are a number of people who are working at home, who are working differently or telecommuting, who have flexible work arrangements that allow them to travel in off-peak hours. Yes, all these things have happened to a degree. However, we would have seen that our roads are full of cars, people trying to get around, and that our transit system was operating at capacity through those peak hours on the surface transit and the subways, which is more talked about. And there are more people coming, right? The status quo is already not really serving us well, and there are more people coming. So I think it's not just thinking about the urgent need that we have right now, and I think we should, we're talking about automated vehicles, but I think there are things we should be doing right now to improve people's opportunities to get around using public transit. But if we're going to be talking about off in the future, no, I don't believe that a future where everybody hops into an automated vehicle is going to give us the kind of city that we want to live in. I can't imagine being in a city where automated vehicles are running nose to tail at high speed if the technology allows that, and what that would do to the public realm and the experience of people living in the city and the safety of pedestrians. I don't see it. That's what the technology talks about doing, but I don't see that actually as being livable on our streets. And so if we're talking about the city's goals of being more healthy, we don't want to be encouraging people to hop into an automated vehicle rather than using more active or shared mode. If we're talking about more equity, I would worry about private companies offering services that aren't being where those services aren't being monitored to see that those services are equitably distributed around the region. If we're talking about being environmentally friendly and creating a healthier city and fewer emissions, I think the future is going to be electric, and we can separate that. But all of the other social and equitable issues and the livability of the issues of the city, I think, are important. And I can't imagine a livable city in an AV future that isn't transit supportive and supportive of shared and active mobility.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Martin Shen? No. Martin Shen? No? Okay. Questions for staff? Councillor McKelvey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my questions are very similar to my last line of questioning in terms of who is responsible for regulations. And so can you just kind of step through where the province is responsible versus what do we as a municipality have in terms of jurisdiction?
So through the chair, the province has released a testing framework for automated vehicles that was effective in January of 2015, and it allows universities, some private sector, original equipment manufacturers and others to test automated vehicles on any road within Ontario. And that's really at levels 3, 4, and 5 of automation on a 5-point scale, so at the higher end of the scale. As of the beginning of this year, the province amended that testing framework and also now allows for driverless testing. Any company that's undertaking driverless testing must notify the municipality through the city clerk, but the city does not have any jurisdiction over the operation of these vehicles on our streets or highways. So our jurisdiction really is around things like parking, where vehicles are used in city services, et cetera. We don't regulate the flow of traffic and the types of vehicles that are used on our streets.
And can we impose in any way like a cap on the number of automated vehicles we would allow in the city, for example?
No.
And in your report, number 5, recommendation number 5, you speak to having a proposed framework for designation of innovation zones in the city of Toronto. So could we, for example, like other cities are, identifying several roads which are preferred roads for testing of automated vehicles? So for example, a car manufacturer, we could say these are the roads where you come to Toronto, these are your test roads, and then from there you can roll out across the city. Can we step out the rollout or the testing in any sort of way?
So for a vehicle on the road, we can't regulate it to stay only in that innovation zone, but we can incentivize the testing organization to focus in that area. There are some automated vehicles that will be traveling outside of the roadway onto, say, sidewalks or other infrastructure, maybe even in a private environment outside of the jurisdiction of the Highway Traffic Act, that we could also influence and regulate to a greater extent.
And then my last question is, you talk about having support and looking at emergency response and how you deal with these vehicles, and what does that entail? And I will use the question that inevitably we'll get at some point, like, are we ready for Skynet? Like, are we ready for, what are you looking at in terms of emergency preparedness?
So that's a project that's just beginning, looking at testing response and incident preparedness, so that if there is testing and we are notified of specifically of driverless testing within the city, that communication is distributed to the appropriate divisions and agencies within the city's jurisdiction, and that we have in place some standards around how the vehicle will navigate through work zones, how our first responders will be notified and prepared for any emergencies, some of the training required to ensure that they know how to properly engage with the vehicle and the technology in the unfortunate event of something.
So we're more prepared than just having Linda Hamilton on speed dial?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKelvey. Any other questions for staff? Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong?
So all this, the budget impact, that's all going to the Budget Committee, yes?
Correct.
Just because I asked on the other item, whose report is this? The attached report, Automated Vehicle Tactical Plan. Whose report? It says it's our report?
Yes, it was written in-house.
So all these many pages were just written by us, or did we have a consultant?
No, there were a number of research projects, independent research projects and activities in partnership with organizations like the University of Toronto. We pooled that all together and we produced the actual tactical plan in-house, both the writing and design of it.
So there wasn't any there's just internal staffing costs, there wasn't any external consulting costs?
There were some public consultation costs, but not to a consultant. One part of the review process for the tactical plan was a peer review. And so we did spend about $25,000 to have experts from 4 different continents review the draft plan at that time and provide feedback on it.
Oh, good for you. Thank you. It's nice to see a report that can be written by our staff.
Yes, agreed. Any other questions for staff? Okay. Speakers. Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you. There was talk during the questions about rollout of autonomous vehicles and congestion and numbers and the thought that this could compete with public transit. And we can have both. We can have automated public transit. And there is a shuttle that is coming to my ward as a test, and it's electric, which is exciting, and it is microtransit. And it's a very important pilot because it's about getting people out of their cars onto public transit and then transferred into a major public transit node, specifically the Rouge Hill GO station. And there has been public consultations and an open house that have been held. And overall, I think people are very excited about it, and they're very optimistic about the idea. They're happy it's coming to their community. Of course, with any large project. You do have a range of opinions, so there are concerns. But I do want to thank staff because they've been very diligent at responding to all of those concerns, to addressing the public input that has come in. And I'm very excited that the request for proposal will be issued soon, and that next year we'll be able to have Toronto's first automated microtransit vehicle in our community. That said, I have the same sort of concerns I had with the last item, that the province has a lot of the jurisdiction here, and we have very limited powers in terms of what we can do to regulate automated vehicles. And in particular, we have no way to limit the number that are used single occupancy, or we have to be creative in trying to make sure that we have multiple people in these cars, so we don't just end up with congestion again, but now with an automated electric vehicle. And while that's great in terms of carbon and the environment, it still doesn't help with congestion and road safety, which we need to watch for as well. So I'm very excited by the huge range of issues that staff have incorporated into this, and that it has been very multifaceted, and I'd like to thank them for that work. Similarly, I did ask questions yesterday. I asked about, what about drones? And again, we don't have any regulation over drones in the City of Toronto either. And so in other cities, they've identified routes, preferred routes for testing of drones, for example, between two hospitals to roll out that technology. We can't do that here because it's federal jurisdiction. Similarly, we can't identify a route of roads that we would like to be the first roads that a new manufacturer uses. They bring their car in, this is your test route. Once you've passed what the City of Toronto would like to see, you can roll out through the rest of the city. So thank you to staff for doing what we can with our limited jurisdiction.
Thank you, Councillor McKelvey. Any other speakers? Councillor Layton?
I'll just say, I hadn't put much thought into the municipal role around automated vehicles until this report, staff reached out to give me a briefing, and I found it quite informative, and fills me with confidence when I know that even though I'm not thinking of it, someone at the city is, and preparing us for what will be a radical change in in our transportation system. It's also, I'm glad that our staff is reaching out to experts in the field and including them in the discussion around how this is working in other jurisdictions, as well as how this works theoretically, and that we have this sort of tactical plan in place. I will add too, it fills me with confidence that we have experts on staff that will be able to ensure that, that we're at the cutting edge of this. But at the same time, I am also quite happy that when our staff don't feel they have that level of expertise, that they go and seek outside consultant support when they're preparing information. I personally want the best information possible in front of us, and I don't care if we don't have that expertise on staff. If we don't, then I'm glad that our staff in transportation feel confident that they can, with our endorsement, go and find those experts and pay them for the best advice possible. Thank you. Thank you to staff for this.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Any other speakers on this item? I'm going to reserve my comments for council. Okay. Are there no motions? We don't have any motions here on this item. Okay. This goes to council. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Councillor Cole, you have an item you've been holding you'd like to release?
I'll release that.
I have a quick question and a quick motion.
Yeah.
But I think it's next anyhow, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. So we can do the item. We can do the item now. So
It's on now.
8.8, update on council requested road safety initiatives and recommended speed limit reductions. Now, Councillor Cole, you did hold the item, but you're releasing it. There is, Councillor Layton, question.
Yeah, I just had, in the rollout of these, it listed how long it would take to do all of the controlled crossings at TTC stops, how long does it take from the moment the city approves a crossing to the moment it's installed, at our current rate?
Through the chair, often at the current rate, we're looking at a year to sometimes a year and a half for a standard signal. When there's more complex civil work that needs to be required, we've seen situations where it's taken multiple years. And we are working on ways to change that so that we can have a temporary signal in place before that major civil work is required.
Now let's add a layer in. So before council approves a controlled crossing, how long is it between when the investigation, you get a call from 311, a call from the councillor's office, a petition from neighbors, all of that in advance of the council approval? How long is that process?
Through the chair, that would vary, but I've seen it happen as quick as a couple of months. It may be longer.
There's no typical number. You can't give me an average.
I wouldn't have an average. I would say that part of it would depend on, you need to have the right time of year to do the traffic study. So if the request is made in the heat of January, you wouldn't want to be doing the analysis for that then, because partly the pedestrian warrant is based on wanting to have regular conditions for pedestrian demand.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Any other questions for staff? Yeah, so we do need a motion to extend to finish with 4 minutes to go before lunch break. All those in favor? A 5-minute extension? Why don't we just move to finish? I don't think so.
There's not enough speakers to drag this thing on. Okay. It's fine. Yep.
Okay, move to 1 o'clock. All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, any others? Did I call for speakers on this? Item 8. Were there any other speakers on this? No? Okay.
Oh, speakers, no other questions.
Councillor Layton.
Yeah, I have a motion that City Council requests the General Manager Transportation Services to include as part of the 2020 budget submission the resources that would be required to speed up the installation of A, controlled intersections, B, speed humps and bumps, and C, bump outs and other pedestrian road safety measures. So I have a development at the corner of Scrivener and Yonge Street, right beside the liquor store. Big development. They're actually going to be, at least they're inking a deal so that they're going to build the underground portion of the accessibility at Summerhill Station. This is good news. Development, good developer, positive impact on the neighborhood. But in order to build the underground section of the road, we actually have to close down the entrance to the liquor store and to condominiums and divert traffic around. So we approved a traffic light at the corner of Pace, I don't know, one of those two, and Yonge Street. As we prepare for the development, it's unclear the city's going to be able to get this thing in the ground by the time we need it. I'm sure we'll be able to work it out. Staff are at the table, developers at the table, TTC at the table. We'll figure that out. But it was 2 years. 2 years, and they couldn't tell us for sure it would be in the ground. And they needed some certainty because this is a multi-million-dollar development that includes something that's coming back to the city by way of this additional access. And it just surprised me that given the level of importance we've put on Vision Zero, that we have such a backlog of installation for the controlled intersections. And then if you look at the backlog for speed humps and bumps, for bump outs, it can be even longer than that. And if we're really serious about it, then we need to understand a little bit better what the costs would be about advancing that faster. Now, it doesn't mean that necessarily that it's going to cost more, because much of this work will get done. Some of it's paid for by development. Much of the work is going to get done anyhow out of our capital budget. I'm just wondering, and I'm curious, if we can and what it would take to advance some of that work so we could do it faster. And if it means more resources by way of a couple more engineers to help design the work, or a better way, or more staff to help bundle these projects to send them out to procurement. Again, I don't think it would cost more money overall, just might let us bump up some of the capital dollars to actually bump up the speed humps. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I don't mind looking at this, but I think it could cost money. I've been through this before, and my understanding is usually they bundle the work. So, for example, they just do one intersection. They put out a contract to vendors. I mean, I think the council should be listening to this, because I don't think he may know this. But they bundle intersections like 3 or 4 at a time, and and they get a lower price. And just to send something out on a one-off, that could increase the price of whatever the intersection might cost. And so there has to be balancing out between trying to get things out the door as quickly as possible, and actually, instead of only having money to build 3 intersections because your budget is limited and you're going to blow all that money, you might actually, if you wait a little longer and put that contract out, you might have money for 4. So it may sound easy, but it's not, and so we can look at that, but I suspect that's going to come out in the report, that they bundle these contracts out to save money so we can actually build more infrastructure.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong. Any other speakers on this item? 8.8. Okay, so we have the motion. It's on the screen. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. The item is amended. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Last item on the agenda is yongeTOmorrow, Municipal Class Environmental Assessment on Yonge Street from Queen Street to College, Carlton, interim update. Kevin Raspingle? Rupa Single. Kevin? Oh, there you are. Okay, great. Thanks for hanging around. 5 minutes.
Hello. Hi, everyone. So I'm here, my name's Kevin. I'm representing Cycle Toronto, nonprofit cycling advocacy organization, represent over 3,000 members around the city. But we're here, we also advocate on behalf of the tens of thousands of Torontonians that do and would ride their bicycles if they felt that it was safe to do so. I want to speak to you about the yongeTOmorrow initiative that the city is looking at right now. And I want to say Cycle Toronto is incredibly supportive of this project. This is a huge opportunity for the City of Toronto to improve Yonge Street. And Yonge is an iconic street that has an immense amount of density. It's a place that people want to spend time on. It's a place that people want to go to, and it's a place people want to get through. And I think it's really important to remember when we're looking at this project, when we rebuild streets in the 21st century, we need to be mindful of what it means to create a space that is welcoming for people. And it could be people on foot, it can be people coming in on transit, or it's people on bikes. It doesn't matter, it needs to be welcoming for people. And that means it has to be welcoming and safe for children, for seniors, for families. It needs to be welcoming no matter what your age or ability is. And this is a massive opportunity that we have here to have a much bolder vision of what Yonge can be. This also means that we have an opportunity to go through, to realize some of the mandates that the City of Toronto has right now. And the two really big ones that come up are our Vision Zero and our climate emergency mandates. You councillors and City Council has committed the city to make sure that it's safe for all road users, particularly people walking and cycling, and with a goal of 0 road fatalities. You also recently declared a climate emergency, and that has committed the city to make sure that we are drastically reducing our carbon emissions. And keeping those mandates in mind is how we should be moving forward with the rest of this process. So Cycle Toronto is very supportive of what this report mentions as a car-free portions of Yonge Street. If you go through the report and see some of the statistics that are mentioned about how dense this area is and how incredibly pedestrian-oriented it is, this portion of Yonge absolutely warrants some portions to be considered as car-free. And Cycle Toronto absolutely supports that. We have seen car-free area works around the world and in other parts of the continent. For example, you can see here in Scotland, this is an area that's very commercial. It has an access to an underground facility. People are walking and biking and enjoying themselves. In the UK, in England, another example, and it's important to note here, car-free doesn't quite literally mean car-free. It means that very, very particular amounts of cars with particular drivers are able to access the space, as you can see with that delivery vehicle there. This is another one around the corner from the previous one, where people are walking, biking, they're enjoying themselves on patios, and generally enjoying their city. You don't even need to go across to other parts of the world. You can just look at somewhere like New York, where this is one of many examples where what was thought to be taking space away from the most important people on the road, car drivers, was not actually the case. And the overall improvement that was made in one of many plazas in New York City was by making it a car-free area. So, as I mentioned, Cycle Toronto is supportive of a car-free section, but we also want to just make sure that we recognize that when we have car traffic on a major arterial street, that there still needs to be a protected bike lane in other parts of Yonge. And we've seen this on Bloor Street, we've seen this on Richmond and Adelaide. We know that people will only ride their bicycles if they feel that it is safe to do so. And people don't feel safe when it's an arterial street with general car traffic. We know that we can make it beautiful. We know that we can make it safe not just for cyclists, but for people walking and for people driving. We've seen this on Bloor as an example, that the street became safer when a protected bike lane was put in. And so we're happy to support car-free segments, but we also need to be mindful of making sure that the street is safe for cycling elsewhere. And lastly, we're very supportive of continuing the rest of this process, continuing to consult with the public, with other stakeholders, and identifying ways to really bring this bold vision for Yonge to life. So I think, thank you very much for your time today. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Questions for the deputant? No? Yes, Deputy Mayor Wong.
Those similar slides in wintertime?
I'd certainly be happy to find some for you if you'd like.
Same place? I know. Yeah, I know, but in the wintertime, what does it look like in a lot of those other places?
Okay.
One day. One day.
Any other questions for the deputants? No? Okay. Questions for staff? Thank you very much. Thank you again. Questions for staff? Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong?
Yeah, I'm looking at page 6 of 20, over the last 20 years. Do you know how much in the downtown core congestion has increased in the last 20 years and how much cars are delayed? I think that's an important slide. Do you think that's an important slide?
Through the chair. Do I think that's an important slide?
Yeah, do you think that's an important?
I think
It's a relevant and an important piece of information that should be before this committee.
Well, we certainly are bringing back the results of our congestion management plan update next month. We can look at what's in there and see if we can answer some of those questions about congestion. I do think that, we monitor congestion, especially in the downtown. Since the King Street pilot, we have a lot more ability to manage and monitor that, and we bring back some data about congestion, certainly on the Gardiner as well. We often do it related to specific projects. This, as you know, is kind of a unique take on our EA process in that we're looking at something early before we actually are coming forward with any kind of preliminary recommendations. So if there's more information you'd like to see on congestion, we can put that forward.
Through the chair, I'd also add that in this study process, we're looking at the mode change that the downtown core has experienced. And so when we look at driving in particular, 35% of road users in the area were drivers in 1996. That's decreased by 17% to just over 17% now in 2016. So we've seen a 17.5% decrease in driving in the core.
And how much has congestion increased?
As the general manager stated, we'll be reporting back on congestion management at the next meeting.
So so when you wrote this report, you did the analysis and all these things, but you left out congestion. Is that fair to say? Because unless it's in the report, and can you point out to me where congestion is mentioned and what the change has been in the last 20 years? Can you point out to me in the report where that is?
No, I can't, Councillor,
there?
but what I can say is that we are looking at the
Mr.
way
Chair,
that the
is it
various
there?
options, no, it isn't. And I would say that we're looking at the way the various options would impact travel time congestion as part of this study. So that would certainly be in our report back to the committee in June of 2020.
In June, so we will get a report back on how much congestion has increased.
We will certainly look at that through the chair. This, again, is a unique situation where we're bringing a report well in advance of having any preliminary options. So now that you brought that up as well, we'll make sure that we have more information about that in the report when we bring our preferred alternatives forward.
Does the general manager recognize that congestion is a huge problem in the city and specifically in the downtown core?
Absolutely. That's why we're updating and enhancing our congestion management plan, which we'll be bringing back to
Does the
council.
general manager realize how bad it is at certain intersections like Yonge and Dundas?
And that's why we're putting traffic agents out to help manage congestion through active management this year. So yes, we're pulling all levers on congestion in a growing city. It's still going to be an ongoing issue.
And also, does the general manager recognize that if you restrict the lanes on Yonge Street, congestion will get worse?
I would say that with all transportation changes, we look at the network and the network impacts, where the network has capacity and where the network is constrained. So I would be more interested in looking at what the results of the study are to be able to answer that question.
And will the environmental assessment look at all alternatives?
The environmental assessment is working with the stakeholder committee and the public and a consultant, of course, to look at a number of alternatives. And then when we come back with a preferred alternative through the EA, we will have criteria and how we have evaluated those alternatives. We'll come back to the committee with a preferred alternative.
Does the general manager consider the public as not just the local community, but the broader community and road users?
Absolutely, and I'm going to ask Jacqueline to talk a little bit about the public engagement, which is pretty comprehensive.
No, I don't. Actually, I don't need that, but.
Councillor Layton.
Does the general manager of transportation have any data on pedestrian congestion in the area and its change over time?
It's in the report. Didn't you read the report?
Through the chair, yes, it is in the report. This is one of the first projects where we've looked at congestion factor for pedestrians in particular, because we are at a point at Yonge Street, particularly in the most busy times of day and year, where you have overflow of pedestrians onto the sidewalks, and that is a safety concern.
So I was about to ask, does the general manager recognize that it's becoming a safety concern to walk along the sidewalks in the downtown core, particularly on Yonge Street?
Certainly, one of the major issues and why, in addition to the water main replacement that we're taking on this EA and looking at it more broadly, is because we know that Yonge Street is one of many streets in the downtown core that are over capacity in terms of pedestrian traffic. And so certainly as we look at the alternatives, accommodating a higher level of pedestrian traffic is certainly going to be considered.
The degree that pedestrian traffic is the predominant form of traffic along Yonge Street, we heard the number 17% are driving and that number's down. What is the percentage of pedestrians?
So pedestrians make up 75% of the traffic on Yonge Street and have less than 25% of the space.
Does the general manager of transportation recognize there's some inequality and inequity in that distribution of space and people?
The data that we look at, the robust data that we look at to measure all the modes certainly is taken into consideration, and I do recognize that there are issues, yes.
Well, I certainly think this is all relevant and important information that would be relevant to this committee and this discussion. Thank you.
We're always looking for relevant, important information. Any other questions for staff? Just very quickly. So next step is a $3.7 million environmental assessment that is funded through the capital budget.
Through the chair, the environmental assessment is well underway at that costed price that you mentioned. The next step is that we are going to be bringing the status of the project to the design review panel on November 7th. On the same day, the information for the next phase of public consultation will be released online, and the next public consultation drop-in event will be held on November 21st. We've had a wide public consultation process for this project, and we seek that to continue to make sure that we're hearing from people who live and work on the street, as well as those who come through the area. We know it's a very important street for all Torontonians.
The environmental assessment is a third-party consultant that usually conducts those?
We have a staff project manager who's here beside me, Joanna Kite, and we have a third-party consultant, steer consultant firm that's assisting us with the process.
And then this goes up to the province, the minister's office for review and a sign-off?
It is a municipal class environmental assessment process, so ultimately we would bring back our recommended option to council, and that would be publicly vetted through a 30-day review process and submitted to the province following that.
Okay, thank you. Speakers. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you very much. And I want to thank staff for their presentation and also bringing out the early options that are being considered by the consultant, the 30-party consultant. I know that a lot of work has taken place in a very short period of time, what it seems like a short period of time, but for the community at large, it is probably work that's long overdue and much anticipated, years in anticipation. The last time Yonge Street was sort of open and under construction was probably back in the 1940s and 1950s when we were actually putting in the subway. And at that point in time, the city looked very, very different. Without a doubt, I think that we have a lot of old infrastructure that's buried under all of the City of Toronto. And some of the infrastructure under this part of the City of Toronto goes back to the late 1800s. So there's an opportunity here and a moment in time where we can actually capture all the momentum and the growth and the excitement of the city as it sort of magnifies and sort of scales up around iconic Yonge Street, and recognize that the street will have to be reopened, will have to be open to do significant water main upgrade. So we have now a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reimagine and to rethink what Yonge Street will look like for the next 100 years. And that's really the exercise that the staff have undertaken with the local community. The road will have to be opened up. The question is, do we want to put the road back in the same configuration as it was first designed back in the 1940s and the 1950s, knowing that the city has evolved dramatically? And I would think that based on the information that we have received from staff before us, and really the robust consultation from thousands of residents as well as business owners across the core, the answer is a resounding absolutely no way. Putting the street back in the same configuration is not a go option for this community, especially since 75% of those who are traveling to this area are traveling so as pedestrians, and yet they only have 25% of the sort of public allocated real estate. We also know that the street is has been sort of Toronto's main street for a number of years. But here's an opportunity to redesign a street with the future in mind, having green infrastructure placing very prominently. Is there a way for us to build a resilient street of the future? Can we demonstrate best of class with some of that technology? Can we actually pursue active transportation in a much more robust and thoughtful way? The mayor has talked about creating a festival in the winter for the city, and can it be hosted on Yonge Street? Is that an option here for us? So there are so many considerations before us, and I want to thank the staff for actually working so well with the third-party consulting team, which is a world-class, award-winning consultant. We're very fortunate to have them. But also to work so thoughtfully for the wide range of stakeholders and through the public consultation. I know that there's not a final decision that's before us today, but I do think that there should be some considerations that we need to sort of think through as we move forward. Number one is that the population is expected to double by 2041. That is significant change for the city. I don't think our forefathers and foremothers may have even forecasted where our city would grow and how we would actually become this global player, so that we can actually rival that of civic spaces that are proposed and built out in Paris and New York and other iconic urban centers. 42 million people right now traverse by foot up and down Yonge Street, and yet they are obviously crowded in that very narrow sidewalk that's far too substandard for a street as busy as we are. So these are the big decisions for us later on, not now, but I do think that as the opportunity that's before us now is that we get to, and this is the most exciting part, this council will decide on what Yonge Street, Toronto's Main Street, Canada's Main Street, our celebration street, what it will look like for the next 100 years. And this is our opportunity. Thank you very much to staff.
Thank you, Councillor Wong Tam. Any other speakers on the item? Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much. Just very, very briefly, I'd like to thank Councillor Wong Tam for really initiating this deeper dive into what Yonge Street could be. This was under the previous council. Now I'm the city councillor for the second phase of part of the first phase, but mostly the second phase of the of this project, this undertaking. I think Councillor Wong Tam really nailed it right on the head when she said that this is about how the city has grown, and we're just catching up. The neighborhoods around this area have changed so dramatically. The profile of travel has, and it's evident in this report, has changed so dramatically that the city is years behind, and yet people are still wanting to come to this space. This is creating so much wealth for the entire city of Toronto and could do so much more. If you look to these other international examples, the Times Squares, we were just in Copenhagen, and they have a main street not much more narrow than Yonge Street, which just a couple of years ago had cars on it. Now no one would think of putting a car on that street. Crosses their downtown core, some of the most expensive real estate, and locals and tourists interacting. It takes courage. It does take courage to undertake these things and to look at streets a different way, to reprioritize, perhaps turn it upside down a little bit, the way you prioritize or we've prioritized streets in the past. But just because we're not familiar with it doesn't mean we shouldn't be a bit brave to say, yes, this will change the way people get around in this particular part of town, but the sky will not fall. It won't all of a sudden make any of this land any less valuable. I think with the passage of time, we'll find that it in fact increases the value, as well as increases the level of safety, as well as can be something that we will be putting on reports that we use to try to attract the Googles of the world. Remember Bloor Street? And it was a big contentious file when we put the bike lanes on? Yeah, to try to get Google here, or Amazon here, we put pictures of a fake Bloor Street in the manual, in the offering, because that's what the global community wants to consume. And is it going to put people out in the city? No, it won't. Will it be a big change? Yeah, it will. And one, I think, definitely for the better, no matter what outcome comes from this. So I'd encourage staff to keep going, think big, think bold, and thank Councillor Wong Tam for her initiation of this.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Deputy Mayor Min Wong.
I'll try and keep my remarks brief. We only have till 1 o'clock. So I think there are a lot of folks who are really suspicious of what the city's doing to restrict vehicles in the city. I know one business owner who has his business just off Yonge Street, and it's a fairly substantial business, and he's not, and this business is not supportive of this initiative. And he says to me, he says, you know what's in those cars that drive on Yonge Street? Money. And those are the folks that want to come downtown and spend their money. They want to buy, they want to shop, they want to eat, they want to drink. And there are a lot of folks that are really concerned that this city's becoming more difficult to move around in. And that means congestion is getting worse. And this initiative, I see it, and I think there's enough, because you look at this report, and there is not one drop of ink spilled on on how congestion has increased and how it's gotten worse. It seems that we've lost the plot. The residents of the City of Toronto get this. This city is becoming more difficult to move around in. Congestion is getting worse, and the solution in this arrangement will likely be to make it it's going to be even worse than it already is. And so I have a great concern that that the folks that are preparing this report, and as we move forward, that that drivers are going to be left at the curb, and I think that's wrong. And I think that that this council is actually quite tone deaf to the things that it's doing to make it harder to move around in the city.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for the commentary, Councillor Layton. Thank you for the speech, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong. Any other speakers on the item? No? Okay. Well, this was just an update. Does anyone want to move the staff recommendation to receive? Oh, Councillor Layton.
Yep. I'll move. Receive.
Okay.
Move the staff recommendations.
All those in favor? All those in favor? Opposed? I didn't see any hands up go for yes or no. All those in favor? Opposed?
Wake up. Let's do one more time. Here we go.
All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. We are adjourned. Thank you very much. We're done our agenda. Enjoy the rest of the day. Enjoy the rest of the week. And stay warm out there.